Larissa Rodriguez grew up in a humble but close-knit family. Her parents were modest and reserved. They raised her with strong values of integrity, a strong work ethic, and family loyalty. From an early age, Larissa showed remarkable discipline. She trained in gymnastics, later graduated with a degree in sports science, and worked as a trainer and instructor at a fitness club. She led a healthy lifestyle, avoided harmful habits, meticulously cared for her well-being. She had only one serious relationship with Luis Antonio Garnica, who became her first partner and later her husband. To the family, he seemed quiet and polite. Larissa believed in the ideal of a strong family, and despite strains in their relationship, she remained committed to preserving the marriage. Luis came from a well-off background. His father had served as mayor of Pontal, and Luis himself was trained in medicine. But behind that veneer of success, he was self-centered and calculating. According to Larissa's relatives, at the beginning of their relationship, he had no steady income and depended on Larissa's mother, who sent him home, cooked meals, over time. Despite having a diploma, his finances never improved, and he struggled to support two parallel lives, his official marriage and a secret relationship. His standing among Larissa's friends and family deteriorated. He grew increasingly withdrawn, distant, and indifferent. Even during Larissa's mother's final days, he visited only when forced. In the last months of the marriage, Luis was emotionally detached, cold, and often degraded his wife about her appearance, avoiding any real communication. Despite her efforts to reconcile, he continued to move further away, ignoring the obvious signs of their relationship's crisis. Elizabeth Arabaza, Luis's mother, played a pivotal role in this story. At 68, she appeared quiet and unassuming, but in reality, she was a manipulator with a troubling history. Her former husband and her daughter claimed she had a gambling problem and was deeply in debt. There were suspicions surrounding her involvement in the mysterious death of a relative connected through financial dealings. She often asked acquaintances for money and was suspected of selling others' jewelry. Her behavior within the Garnica family drew mixed opinions. With Larissa, she maintained the image of a caring mother-in-law, yet she regularly shared confidential information with her son and withheld crucial details from her daughter-in-law. Over time, it became clear she had played a decisive role in tearing the family apart and setting the stage for the tragic events that followed. These three figures, Larissa, Luis, and Elizabeth, became the central players in a chain of events whose outcomes were irreversible. In the spring of 2025, tensions between Larissa and Luis escalated dramatically. Their conflicts had become a regular occurrence, and any remaining trust was shattered. Luis's behavior grew increasingly distant. He often claimed to be working late or on call, but in reality, he was frequently meeting with another woman named Leticia. Larissa didn't know the woman's name at first, but she began to suspect he was seeing someone else, especially after noticing odd changes in his routine and his frequent irritation for no clear reason. Her suspicions were confirmed after she discreetly followed him one evening in mid-March. Larissa spotted Luis heading toward Letitia's house on a night he claimed to be working an overnight shift. Not long after that, she found personal items in his car, along with a medical-grade anesthetic, which clearly indicated a secretive relationship. She confided in Elizabeth, her mother-in-law, hoping for understanding. Instead, Elizabeth quickly told Luis about the confrontation and criticized Larissa for spying on him. Rather than receiving comfort, Larissa was told that being unfaithful is just something men do. Larissa didn't act on impulse. Despite her personal disappointment, she still tried to preserve her family. According to her father, she wanted to have a calm conversation with Luis and find a peaceful resolution. Over the next few days, she spoke privately with close friends about the possibility of divorce, but asked them not to get involved. Meanwhile, a friend offered her temporary use of an unoccupied apartment to help her take a step back and think things through. On March 15, 2025, Larissa tells Luis of her decision to end the marriage. She also confirmed her intentions to a trusted friend. Her goal was to reduce tension and prepare for a respectful separation. The following day, March 16th, Elisabetta Arabata began researching highly toxic substances online. That same day, she offered Larissa homemade soup. Larissa, unaware of any danger, accepted the meal. Within hours, she began experiencing severe gastrointestinal symptoms, including cramps and nausea. Despite feeling unwell, Larissa assumed the discomfort was caused by stress or possibly spoiled food. On March 18th, Larissa once again opened up to a close friend, expressing how drained she felt physically and emotionally. She said her energy was slipping away and shared her concern that Louise continued to avoid any meaningful conversation. At the same time, Elisabetta, his mother, became unusually attentive, bringing food, initiating frequent visits, and insisting on helping Larissa, despite previously criticizing her for wanting to leave the marriage. By March 19th, Larissa confided in a relative about her worsening condition. She described sudden chills, weakness, abdominal pain, and an overwhelming sense of dread. She noted that she had never experienced anything like it before, and that the symptoms had persisted for several days. That message would become one of the last times she discussed her health. On March 20th, Larissa told her father she no longer saw a future in the marriage. Though she was still hoping to avoid a public fallout, she wanted the divorce to be amicable, if possible. That day, Elisabetta seemed calm but continued bringing over food. Larissa, although feeling unwell, didn't yet suspect a link between the meals and her condition. She assumed her health issues stemmed from emotional stress. Then came March 21st. Elisabetta arrived again with homemade soup. Larissa's condition took a drastic turn for the worse. By late that evening, she stopped responding to calls and messages. A few hours later, the devastating news came. She had passed away. On the morning of March 22nd, 2025, Louise reported that he had found his wife unconscious in their apartment. He claimed he'd just returned from a night shift, walked in, and found Larissa lying on the floor. According to his account, he immediately began CPR and called emergency services. However, discrepancies between his story and the actual evidence began to surface within hours of the investigation. One critical detail was a message Louise sent to Natalyia. At 10:25 m.m., he texted Natalyia to tell her that Larissa had passed away. Just 9 minutes later, at 10:34 m., paramedics arrived. Yet when they entered, Louise was still performing resuscitation efforts, claiming Larissa was showing signs of life. The medical team quickly determined otherwise. She was already in a state of rigor mortis, making revival impossible. Emergency personnel documented that her body was cold, with no pulse or breathing, and her skin showed clear signs consistent with an extended time of death. When police arrived at the scene, one of the first things they noted was Louise's insistence on a rapid cremation. He didn't notify Larissa's family right away about her passing and took it upon himself to begin arranging the necessary paperwork for cremation. This immediately raised red flags for investigators, especially since Larissa's cultural background strictly followed burial traditions, with cremation never being considered. At the scene, officers noticed that the environment had been tampered with. Bed sheets had been stripped, rolled up, towels with what appeared to be reddish stains were found nearby, and the laundry basket contained items possibly used for cleanup. The paramedic examining Larissa's body took note of undigested food in her stomach. This detail would later become a critical piece of evidence, prompting a full toxicology analysis. The initial assumption of a sudden cardiac event began to shift toward concerns about a possible poisoning. Louise's behavior on the day Larissa died seemed artificial, as if he were acting to make her death look like a sudden accident. The timeline, the messages he sent, and his behavior before and after emergency services arrived painted a picture that seemed increasingly rehearsed. At first glance, Louise seemed like a distraught husband caught in a crisis, but as investigators dug deeper, examining documents, message logs, and expert findings, the surface narrative started to unravel. attention shifted from simply understanding what happened to examining who may have played a role in the moments immediately after Larissa's life ended. Following the official announcement of Larissa's death, Louise came under increasing scrutiny. Within just 24 hours of the incident, his actions raised serious concerns. The day after Larissa's passing, attempted financial transactions were discovered using her bank accounts. Louise used her debit card to purchase items at a pharmacy and attempted to withdraw cash from an ATM. Several of these transactions were flagged and declined due to suspicious activity. One attempt to access her savings account failed because of automatic security blocks. Later, bank officials confirmed that the attempted transactions originated from devices registered to Louise. At a local bank branch in Pontal, a teller reported an unusual request. Viviani, Louise's sister, attempted to obtain account information for Larissa. Despite having no legal authority to access those records, Larissa's account was registered in a different region, and Viviani's attempt to retrieve private financial data without a formal power of attorney was officially logged as an unauthorized access attempt. This incident immediately drew the attention of investigators. Meanwhile, Larissa's family, especially her brother and father, pushed for a thorough investigation into the circumstances surrounding her death. Troubled by rumors and inconsistencies, Larissa's brother sought legal counsel from attorney. Consultations with legal representatives began on March 24th, 2 days after her death. Despite online speculation suggesting Larissa may have taken her own life, her loved ones firmly rejected that possibility. According to those close to her, Larissa had no history of mental health struggles, maintained an active lifestyle, was in therapy, and had clear plans for her future, including filing for divorce. The attorney hired by Larissa's family demanded that no cremation take place until a full toxicological analysis was completed. This move proved critical to the case. The pathologist ordered a comprehensive examination, including toxicology screenings. While the initial exam did not pinpoint an immediate cause of death, the lab tests became central to developing the leading theory. At the same time, investigators focused on digital evidence. Combing through text messages, GPS data, and call logs, recovered chats between Louise, Viviani, and others provided deeper insight. One particularly telling exchange showed Viviani advising Louise to be cautious with their phones and not to confuse devices. In another message, she reminded him to mention a supposed history of heart conditions in Larissa's family when speaking to authorities. These texts were interpreted as an attempt to shape a false narrative and create a medically plausible explanation for what had occurred. While the investigation remained active, the family's lawyer successfully petitioned to freeze all of Larissa's financial accounts and restrict access to her assets. Authorities across relevant agencies were notified. These legal safeguards were essential in preventing further unauthorized actions by Louise and those allegedly working with him. At this point, investigators completely ruled out end her own life. Every move Louise and Viviani made following Larissa's passing appeared calculated, aimed at reducing exposure and covering their tracks. These patterns were sufficient to launch the formal phase of criminal proceedings. Roughly 1 month before Larissa passed away, another family member died under mysterious circumstances, Natalyia, daughter of Elizabeti. At the time, the incident received no public attention. Natalyia lived in Pontal with a long-term partner in a domestic relationship. Shortly before her death, she had a major falling out with her mother. Elizabeti strongly opposed Natalya's plans to start a family and become a parent. Their arguments centered around inheritance issues and shares in the family business. Following the disagreement, Natalya's partner left the house, leaving her alone with Elizabeti, something relatives later described as highly unusual. In the days that followed, Natalyia complained of feeling increasingly unwell. However, Elizabeti never sought medical help or contacted emergency services. Instead, she reached out to Louise and Viviani, who were in another city at the time. The drive from Ribeirão Preto to Pontal takes approximately 40 minutes. During this time, Natalyia remained without assistance. By the time Louise and Viviani arrived, Natalya's condition had deteriorated significantly. She was later taken to a hospital where she died. Eyewitnesses claimed that despite his medical training, Louise didn't advocate for emergency care and seemed more focused on when the death certificate would be issued. This detail was documented and became the subject of further investigation. Initially, Natalya's death was classified as natural, but as Larissa's case unfolded, new findings began to cast serious doubt on that conclusion. One red flag was the unexplained death of Natalya's dog. 2 weeks before the tragedy, relatives reported that the dog had no known health issues. Authorities approved the exhumation of the pet for toxicology testing based on the theory that poison might have been tested on the animal. Natalya's father, Antonio, revealed during questioning that Elisabetta was facing serious financial problems. He stated Elisabetta had debts exceeding 300,000 reais, some of which were linked to gambling. Natalyia held a 16% share in the family business, which, because she had no dependent children, passed directly to her mother upon her death. Antonio also testified that not long before she passed, Natalyia had mentioned receiving threats from her mother regarding her personal life. Elisabetta's alleged efforts to secure full control over those assets led to major tensions with her ex-husband. Further disturbing details emerged about Elisabetta's past. Years earlier, a friend recalled a strange episode. After having tea with Elisabetta, she experienced sharp abdominal pain, followed by unconsciousness. Emergency care saved her, and doctors later suspected a toxic substance had been involved. However, that case was never formally investigated. As Larissa's story gained public attention, more people connected to the Garna family began stepping forward, sharing concerns about Elisabetta's behavior. After reviewing the series of suspicious patterns, investigators reached a preliminary conclusion. Natalyia may have been the first confirmed victim, and her dog potentially part of a test run for what followed. The combination of poisoning, delayed medical response, concealed symptoms, and a motive rooted in inheritance formed a disturbing picture. From this point forward, the case took on a much broader scope. A deeper analysis of these incidents revealed a consistent pattern in Elisabetta's financial behavior. She repeatedly sought new sources of income, pressured those close to her, and manipulated legal access to property and assets. After Natalyia and Larissa passed, these tactics intensified in the context of mounting debts and financial instability. Her motives became a central focus of the investigation. Amid the dual investigations into the deaths of Larissa and Natalyia, law enforcement began uncovering information that hinted at additional potentially criminal episodes linked to Elisabetta Arabata. The case involved a woman who had been friendly with Elisabetta. Years after an odd incident, she finally spoke out. Following a tea visit at Elisabetta's home, she suddenly felt dizzy, nauseous, and disoriented. Elisabetta offered her a headache remedy, a blue capsule. She took the pill, but was later hospitalized that night with suspected poisoning. Doctors documented toxic exposure to an unknown substance, but the woman never filed a report at the time. She later admitted she was afraid of becoming entangled in legal battles. Eventually, she reached out to Larissa's family attorney after media reports surfaced about possible poisonings. Yet another concerning event came to light. Elisabetta had attempted to obtain power of attorney from a woman expecting to receive court-ordered compensation. The woman, alarmed by Elisabetta's persistence, later told investigators she feared she might have been a future target. Her statement was formally included in the case files. According to law enforcement, a clear pattern was beginning to emerge in Elisabetta's actions. She would first establish close relationships with financially stable women, earn their trust, and shortly afterward, they would suffer sudden and unexplained health issues. Given these accounts, investigators began pursuing a new theory. They might be dealing with a series of connected incidents rather than isolated ones. Law enforcement officials issued a public appeal, urging anyone who had experienced suspicious behavior from Elisabetta Arabata to contact authorities. Once the toxicology reports came in, the investigation entered a decisive phase. forensic specialists confirmed the presence of a compound derived from chumbinho, a banned toxic substance in Larissa's system. This finding was pivotal. Until then, Louise and Elizabeth had claimed that Larissa passed away from natural causes, but the chemical evidence completely debunked their story. Another critical piece of the puzzle came from surveillance footage at the residential complex. Security cameras showed that, on the morning of March 22nd, Louise arrived at the apartment later than he had claimed, and Viviani arrived shortly before emergency services were called. These details directly contradicted their official statements. Taken together, the presence of a toxic compound, suspicious online searches, misleading explanations, tampered evidence, and timeline inconsistencies formed a clear chain of evidence. Investigators concluded that Larissa's death was not a random event, but a carefully coordinated act carried out by multiple individuals. The evidence didn't just suggest wrongdoing, it presented a legally viable case of premeditated criminal activity. By mid-April 2025, the investigation reached the stage of formal charges based on forensic data, digital correspondence, and verified discrepancies in witness accounts. Police filed charges against three primary individuals: Elisabete Arabat, Luis Garnica, and his sister, Viviani Garnica. The main charge involved the intentional death of Larissa Rodriguez through poisoning. Investigators determined that Elisabete had prepared Larissa's meals in the final days of her life, actively researched toxic substances, created a plan to conceal the act, and coordinated the actions of her family members. Luis was charged as an accomplice. He was aware of his mother's intentions, failed to intervene, concealed signs of poisoning, and helped destroy evidence afterward. He was also the one who pushed for rapid cremation, a move that could have eliminated the chance of detecting any toxic substances. Viviani was also named as an accomplice. Her role included coordination with her brother, erasing digital traces, attempting to access the victim's bank accounts, and helping conceal key details surrounding the incident. Recovered messages from her phone confirmed that she knew about Larissa's death in advance and was involved in planning how to speak with law enforcement and medical professionals. Simultaneously, a separate investigation was launched into the circumstances surrounding Natalyia's passing. Another contributing factor was the earlier death of Natalyia's dog, which had also raised alarms. While formal charges in Natalyia's case had not yet been filed, the evidence was placed in a separate investigative file. The charges against all three individuals were formally submitted to the district attorney's office. Each was summoned for questioning. Following the interrogation, both Elisabete and Louise were taken into custody. Viviani was placed under travel restrictions, required to remain within the region, and ordered to surrender her passport. Meanwhile, the court approved a request to seize Garnica family assets and freeze all accounts tied to the suspects. The case sparked significant public interest. Journalists, advocacy groups, and legal experts began a national conversation about the shortcomings in addressing domestic aggression, legal loopholes in women's protection, and missed warning signs. Many pointed out that the tragedy might have been avoided had social services intervened earlier. At this point, the charges have been formally established, and the investigation has completed the collection of core evidence. Next, the trial will proceed, with the expectation of revealing the whole truth to the public.
Hello, everyone. Today, we will learn about another case. The case of Chelsea Bruck. A party for 1,000 people seems like the perfect place to enjoy the festive atmosphere and have fun. However, horrors sometimes lurk just outside, bringing with them unsolved mysteries and hauntings. Chelsea Bruck was born in 1992 in Trenton, Michigan, USA. Her mother, Leanda, worked at a bank, while her father, Matthew, was a farmer. She is the youngest of 5 children. Chelsea has 3 older sisters, Jennifer, Megan, and Cassandra, and a brother named Nathaniel. She is especially close to Cassandra, who is only 2 years older than she is. But all of her siblings share a close and loving relationship. Chelsea's family exemplified a typical American household. They lived in a small town with a population of about 500 people. where everyone knew each other and crime rates were very low, growing up on a 65-acre farm established in 1875 by her great-grandfather. Chelsea was raised in a supportive, religious environment with strong moral values. Her family also had been involved in agriculture for 4 generations. Chelsea attended a Christian school, where she spent her free time studying Catholic scriptures. Later, she transferred to Monroe Secondary School, which focused on sports, cheerleading, and football. After finishing her education, Chelsea continued to live on the farm with her parents and her sister, Cassandra. During this time, her older sisters got married and moved out. Chelsea had a passion for cooking and intended to attend culinary school to become a chef to gain experience. She took a job at a nearby restaurant called Olga's Kitchen, where she worked as an administrator and felt very happy in her role. Chelsea was a friendly, sociable, and attractive young woman. She loved to express her individuality, often dyeing her hair bright colors like pink and getting a small anchor tattoo behind her ear. When grown up, she maintained a close relationship with her parents. She didn't have a driver's license and wasn't particularly interested in getting one, as her parents always helped her with transportation. By the time she turned 22, she had worked for 4 years and developed a close circle of friends with whom she regularly connected. Chelsea loved going to parties, and one of her favorites was a rock concert organized by a local musician named Mike on his farm. Over the years, what started as a small gathering grew into a well-known event, attracting around 1,000 people, including attendees from neighboring states. Mike had his own band and also invited other local performers. This year, the concert was themed for Halloween and scheduled for October 25, 2014. In Newport, Michigan, which is about half an hour from Ferndale, Chelsea was excited about this big event and planned to attend with her friends Becky Brinson and Laura Taylor. At the event, Chelsea and her friends planned to dress as Poison Ivy from the Batman universe. Chelsea created the costume herself, using a swimsuit as the base and adding various details. After many nights of hard work, the final result was impressive. She crafted a costume that looked original and was worthy of first place. On Saturday, October 25, 2014, the friends gathered for the party. Laura drove them to the party, and they decided not to go home right after the event. Chelsea, now 22 years old, she intended to spend the night at Laura's place. She packed her things and set out for a fun evening. She plans to arrive at the concert around 10 p.m. However, it was still early, and the event had not yet started. Preparations were still in progress, but already hundreds of guests had gathered. Eager for a large-scale party, everything seemed well organized. There were several food and drink vendors, security guards ensuring safety, and parking appeared secure. The girls, who had attended this event before, could not have imagined that this time it would turn into a nightmare. After parking the car, they walked toward the concert venue. Since Chelsea's costume had no pockets, she had to leave her mobile phone in the car to avoid losing it. Nearly 1,000 people attended the event, many dressed in elaborate costumes. Alcohol was abundant, and some attendees were under the influence of illegal substances. These things created a lively atmosphere. Most of the people were unknown to the girls, who had gathered from different cities, but there were several familiar faces. Penny and her sister Heather. The group had a strong bond, having known each other for many years, even though Penny was 10 years older than Chelsea and had her own children. They all felt the energy of the event and enjoyed it. When the rock concert finally began, everyone reveled in the loud music. Chelsea and her friends quickly immersed themselves in the lively atmosphere. They happily drank and danced with everyone. However, because they were too excited to play, Chelsea and her friends lost each other. The situation was further complicated because all the girls were tipsy and disoriented by the noise and chaos of the party, making it hard for them to keep track of everything. Laura tried to locate her friend but was unsuccessful. Becky and Laura weren't overly concerned because there were many acquaintances at the party. They assumed Chelsea was with someone from her circle and would get a ride home later. Around 1 a.m. on October 26, Laura decided to leave the party and go home, unable to find Chelsea in the crowd. Laura gave Chelsea's personal belongings to Becky and asked permission to leave first. Becky woke up early the next morning, aware that none of her friends had plans for that Sunday. They all assumed they would sleep off the effects of the night before. She tried to call Chelsea's mother to inform her that she had Chelsea's things, but couldn't get through. She went about her day, and later in the evening, Chelsea's sister, Cassandra, messaged her to say that Chelsea still hadn't come home. Becky responded that she was spending the night at Laura's place. Everyone felt relieved, thinking Chelsea was safe. But when Chelsea still hadn't returned by Monday, it raised concern. Chelsea's relatives reached out to Laura, but they hadn't heard from Chelsea either. They began contacting all their friends who had attended, and find that none of them had seen Chelsea since they lost track of each other that night. Chelsea hadn't communicated with anyone and don't post anything on social media, which heightened her family's concern. In a state of panic, they went to the Monroe County Police Station to report Chelsea missing. Initially, the police were reluctant to take the case because Chelsea was an adult, 22 years old, who had the right to make her own decisions, including leaving without informing her family. However, her relatives insisted that a search for Chelsea be initiated. Her mother feared that something terrible had happened to her. Immediately after that, detectives began looking into the circumstances surrounding Chelsea's disappearance and defined a search area between Newport and her family farm. As the search efforts continued, detectives sought the assistance of Mike, a rock performer and party organizer, and brought him in for questioning. He agreed to come to the police station to provide his account. Mike was not well acquainted with Chelsea and claimed he had no knowledge of her whereabouts. He did not arouse any suspicion, so he was allowed to go home. The detectives then spoke with the security guards who were present at the event. They stated that they hadn't noticed anything unusual. However, Chelsea's relatives suspected that Mike knew more than he was letting on, so they went directly to his house in search of information about their daughter. They intrusively entered his property, where the party had taken place, and began searching for clues themselves when tensions escalated quickly. Mike permitted law enforcement to enter his area, wanting to avoid any implication of wrongdoing despite the organized search. The authorities found nothing relevant to the investigation. There were no leads. The detectives continued to interview attendees of the Halloween party, but it proved challenging to gather information, as it was a costume event where everyone wore masks and consumed alcohol. These were young people eager to make a name for themselves as a result of their conversations with the party guests. The detectives received hundreds of conflicting statements. Many of these claims were difficult to verify and took a considerable amount of time to investigate. Most of the information turned out to be false, likely due to confusion among people. However, some individuals seemed to purposely exaggerate their stories to gain attention. Some of the statements are completely absurd. One partygoer claimed that a girl could have been kidnapped for slavery, while another suggested that a satanic ritual was taking place. With the possibility of someone being burned alive, the case quickly gained widespread attention. Information, rumors, and falsehoods spread rapidly among local residents. The media was filled with alarming headlines, including wild speculations about victims of satanic rituals. This situation deeply affected the family of Chelsea and Mike, despite the outrageous nature of some claims. The police had to investigate all theories presented by the guests. They discovered that there had indeed been a fire near the stage, reaching heights of 15 to 20 meters. After examining the area, they confirmed that no human remains were found, ruling out the possibility of ritual murder. The search lasted several days and involved many volunteers, but no evidence was discovered. The friends of Chelsea felt responsible for her disappearance since they had left her alone that night and hadn't begun searching for her earlier. They kept a close eye on her social media accounts, hoping to find clues about Chelsea's whereabouts since she was alone. Her boyfriend was not considered the main suspect, however. The police interviewed all the young men who had any connection to Chelsea in recent years, searched their cars, and collected DNA samples from those individuals. During this time, rock singer Mike allowed a command center for the search operation to be set up on his farm and supported the police in every way he could. He even provided a generator so the search team could have electricity. A tent camp was established for volunteers and those concerned about Chelsea's disappearance, including her family and friends. The search for Chelsea continued almost around the clock. But there was little progress, despite the warm welcome and extensive help Mike provided to the investigation. Detectives remained suspicious of him. This was mainly due to his reluctance to communicate, which led them to believe he was hiding something. However, it was understandable why he felt this way, given the intrusive nature of the police presence on his property. Ultimately, all of Mike's belongings were searched, but nothing incriminating was found. The police suspect him of involvement in the incident because, before, when the police arrived, Mike was tackled to the ground, and they even threatened to shoot his dog. The reason for this incident was that when the police arrived, they found Mike covered in blood. It was later revealed that he had gotten dirty while rescuing his dog, which had fallen into a trap and was badly injured. He had carried the animal out of the woods in his arms. Mike was primarily at fault for hosting a party without ensuring the safety of his guests. As a result, he faced criticism from Chelsea's family and the police. Detectives learned from Gavin Hewlett, who provided new details to the investigators. He mentioned that a girl in the poison ivy costume was also looking for her friends after she had gone missing. She approached other party guests, asking about Laura, but no one offered to help. Distressed, she started to cry, and Gavin offered her his cell phone around 1 a.m. Unfortunately, she was unable to reach anyone and only managed to borrow a small amount of money. Chelsea felt very sad about losing her friends and being left alone. She declined his offer for a ride. Witnesses from the party reported that Chelsea arrived at the parking lot but felt stranded. Her belongings, including her phone, were left in the car, leaving her unable to contact anyone or find her friends. Consequently, around 2:45 a.m., Chelsea walked onto the gravel road leading from the parking lot, hoping to find someone she knew for a ride home. Although several people offered her assistance, she chose to decline their help and continued walking alone. This was the last time anyone saw her alive. Many attendees recorded videos and took photos at the party. The police gathered all available materials from the partygoers and are now analyzing thousands of images and videos. Some witnesses mentioned a man selling t-shirts that night. They were searching for him not as a suspect, but as a potential witness who might have seen Chelsea. When officers located the t-shirt seller, he reported that he indeed saw a girl in a bright poison ivy costume, making her hard to miss. He gave to provide the police with some helpful information that a man wearing a sweatshirt and hoodie approached Chelsea, and they engaged in conversation around 3 a.m. She left with him. Their interaction seemed friendly, and they did not hug or flirt. This man was captured on multiple security cameras in the area. Using these recordings and the account of the t-shirt vendor, a forensic artist created a sketch of the man who may have been the last person to see Chelsea alive. This sketch was released to the media, along with a reward for any information that could assist in solving the case. The reward fund gradually increased from $5,000 to $30,000. Leaflets were widely distributed, and Monroe County was filled with photographs of Chelsea by that time. Approximately 300 leaflets had been handed out. Every community had posters featuring her photo, and the leaflets were even included with pizza deliveries. The police station began receiving calls from local residents with tips. Many leads were reported. Data was analyzed, and around 1,000 interviews were conducted. But none of this resulted in significant progress. A breakthrough in the case occurred in 2015, just before the new year, when a woman named Cree Carr contacted the police department. She reported that her boyfriend had confessed to killing Chelsea. Cree had confronted her boyfriend, who threatened her with a knife, and during this confrontation, he revealed that it was the same knife he used to kill the girl in the poison ivy costume. She managed to escape from him as he intended to chase her and her child when knowing about the high-profile case of Chelsea's disappearance. Kresby wanted to assist in the investigation. The police were suspecting that the caller might be seeking revenge. As similar cases had occurred in the past, however, they could not completely disregard her call, so they decided to investigate during their inquiries. They discovered that the report was false. Kresby being one of 2 people arrested by the police, evidence showed that she was indeed a former acquaintance of Chelsea. The second individual detained was Harlan, a 19-year-old who claimed he intervened in a situation where 2 men were harassing Chelsea. He said attempting to rescue her before she was pulled into the fields. Later, Harlan confessed that his story was fabricated. And then, the police received another call on March 22, 2015. A woman was cleaning her yard after winter when she found a red leather shoe without thinking. She discarded it in a garbage bag. Later that evening, her husband noticed the shoe and inquired about it. She explained how she found it while cleaning. He suggested that the shoe might be linked to Chelsea's disappearance, as she had been last seen wearing red shoes. Their home was located 7 kilometers from the party. Police had previously searched this area multiple times, and the couple was shocked that the searchers had overlooked the distinctive red shoe. Confused by the situation, she contacted the police to report her discovery. When officers arrived, they examined the area and the shoe. They confirmed that it closely resembled one belonging to the missing Chelsea. However, they found nothing else nearby. It turned out that this area had not been thoroughly searched before. The searchers were pressed for time and could not conduct a proper investigation before winter set in, and the snow later covered any potential evidence. As a result, the search was essentially ineffective. Soon after, another significant find was made. On the 15th, Eric Milsap was collecting scrap metal with friends when he stumbled upon a red wig while sorting through some debris near the railroad tracks. This wig was identical to one Chelsea had worn on the night she disappeared. Initially, Eric did not contact the police. Although he was aware of the missing girl, he had not paid attention to her accessory. A week later, he saw another news report about the search for Chelsea wearing the same outfit and realized that his discovery might be more important than he had first thought. He began to suspect it could indeed be linked to her disappearance. Despite his initial hesitation, he did not report the discovery to the police right away because he was worried that his DNA might be on the costume. He eventually told his sister about the costume, and she insisted that he inform the police. A week later, Eric reported the items he had found to the sheriff's department. The police went to the location he specified and discovered a carnival costume and Chelsea's wig. As a result, Eric became the main suspect. He shared all the necessary information with the police, including his DNA samples, and maintained that he had never met Chelsea. The investigators pressed him for details, but he continued to deny any involvement. Eric agreed to take a polygraph test and passed it successfully. Meanwhile, forensic experts examined the outfit. They found that the straps had been torn off, indicating that someone had forcibly removed them from the girl, and the leggings were completely ripped. A forensic analysis of the poison ivy suit revealed brown stains that resembled blood. Further testing confirmed that the stains were indeed blood and belonged to Chelsea. By that time, over 1 million flyers had been distributed, but there was still no significant progress in the case. On April 24, 2015, John Markin was preparing his 5-hectare plot, which was densely forested. For construction, this location was close to where Chelsea's clothes had been discovered and not far from the site of a nearby rock concert. During the construction work, a bulldozer became stuck in a muddy area when the driver got out to investigate. He observed what looked like a human skeleton. He alerted the other workers, who confirmed it was indeed a badly decomposed human body without a face. Construction was immediately halted, and the frightened workers contacted the police. The driver informed the dispatchers that he had found human remains. John suspected it might be Chelsea, who was the focus of an extensive search in the vicinity. a piece of the remain clothing had been found, and the remain had light hair when police to arrive at the scene, where they discovered a remain hidden in the underbrush and covered with branches and leaves. Right away, they were sent for forensic examination, and dental records were used to identify the body as that of Chelsea. The forensic expert concluded that Chelsea suffered a brutal death. Her murder was particularly cruel. Her jaw was severely disfigured, literally broken in two, and the bones around her eyes and nose were crushed. Many of her teeth were also knocked out. The cause of death was determined to be a head injury from a strong blow with a blunt object. Additionally, evidence indicated that she had been abused before her death. DNA from the perpetrator was found on Chelsea's body and entered into the police database. But there were no matches. Due to the poor condition of the body, more information could not be obtained. Therefore, the investigation for some time reached a dead end until 2016. When a DNA match was found in the police database, it belonged to Daniel Clay from Monroe County. His DNA was included in the database due to issues related to child support. Daniel had a troubled childhood. His mother was incarcerated shortly after his birth, and he was raised by foster parents in a local orphanage. He later developed a substance abuse problem after failing to secure stable employment. One of his former girlfriends became pregnant, but he denied paternity and did not provide child support. Daniel had a history of criminal behavior, harassment of women, and banned substance trafficking. Yet for some reason, his DNA had not been collected for the police database until now. On July 22, 2016, the police were driving the guy, who tried to escape but was caught. Daniel was taken in for questioning. Initially, he thought the police were investigating him for child support issues, but the detectives quickly shifted the focus to Chelsea's murder. He admitted to being at that Halloween party, but said he left early and denied having any connection to Chelsea. Claimed he had never seen her before, of course. The police officer did not believe him, as posters of Chelsea were displayed everywhere, making it impossible for Daniel not to know about her disappearance. However, he could not explain how his DNA ended up on the clothes and body of Chelsea. Investigators started using more sophisticated techniques to gather information. They employed a good cop, bad cop approach, which led to changes in the suspect's story. He admitted that he had forgotten some details, but he claimed that at a party, he had intimate with an unknown girl. He described her as wearing some kind of suit and said he didn't get a good look at her. The suspect mentioned that he got into a car with her, and after their encounter, they parted ways. However, this statement is obtained because he mistakenly believed that male fluids were found on the remains. In fact, the police did not locate any such fluid, but they did find his skin cells on Chelsea's remains, and on the straps of the poison ivy suit. His DNA was also discovered on the leggings, which were torn along the seam. This evidence suggested that the act was not consensual, and the police had not informed him about any intimate contact with the victim. Only a small group of investigators was aware of this information. Daniel eventually admitted to the crime after the suspect changed his story multiple times. Initially, he completely denied knowing Chelsea and claimed he had not been with anyone that night. However, during another interrogation, his account shifted again. This time, Daniel stated that he did intimate with a girl he met while leaving the parking lot. She got into his car and started flirting with him, although he initially responded to her advances. He soon became aggressive during their encounter. She asked him to bite, hit, and strangle her. He complied and strangled her for several seconds. Afterward, he realized she was unresponsive despite his attempts to revive her. She had no pulse. In shock and panic, Daniel drove for about half an hour along forest roads, trying to figure out what to do. Eventually, he disposed of her body in a remote area near an abandoned site. He could not explain why her clothes were found far from the body. Overall, his story was seen as absurd and unbelievable. Leading no one to trust his account, Daniel created an elaborate web of lies that ultimately led the police to lose patience and charge him with the murder of Chelsea. He claimed her death was an accidental result of a moment of passion, insisting on his innocence until the end. However, the medical examiner contradicted his claims, stating that the actual cause of death was a blow to the head from a blunt object, exposing his entire narrative as false. Daniel's girlfriend testified in court, saying she had never seen any signs of cruelty in him and found it hard to believe he could commit such an act. Meanwhile, another woman revealed that Daniel had confessed to her about the murder. The prosecutor argued that, on the night of the incident, Daniel spotted Chelsea walking alone and defenseless. He deceived her into getting into his car, then abuse, and brutally beat her to death. They was unable to clarify why the girl's suit and wig were found in one location. One shoe was found in another, and her body was discovered in yet another place. There were many unanswered questions in this case. But the key point is that Chelsea's body was recovered and the perpetrator was apprehended. To counter Daniel's false testimony, a special dummy was used to demonstrate how someone could be strangled for a few seconds right in front of the jury. It was shown that his claim was false because, in reality, it takes more than 3 minutes of pressure on the neck to cause death, which left a strong impact on the jury. Additionally, the prosecutor reiterated the injuries inflicted on Chelsea by Daniel. The brutality of the killer was evident in the manner in which he caused these injuries. It became clear that such a heinous act could not have been committed by chance. Daniel was found guilty of both abuse and murder, resulting in a life sentence without the possibility of parole, along with an additional 75 years for other acts of violence against women. Incredibly, Leanda surprisingly revealed in a media interview that she has forgiven her daughter's killer. She even gifted him a Bible, which he promised to keep. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Miriam Bielte. Miriam Bielte grew up in Hildesheim, Germany, where she excelled in school. After completing her studies, she was accepted into the University of Hanover, where she studied mechanical engineering for 5 years and earned a master's degree immediately after graduation. She found a good job as an engineer at a small design company a few years later. In mid-2018, she changed jobs to work for a larger car manufacturer, where she took on the role of design engineer. In 2019, Miriam lived in her hometown of Hildesheim. She was not in a serious relationship, so she continued to live with her parents. She worked for an international company and frequently traveled abroad. At the end of March 2019, the company sent her on another business trip, this time to Southeast Asia to meet with some suppliers. Miriam took additional leave to combine work with vacation. Miriam decided to extend her stay in Thailand. She had heard about the beautiful beaches and rich history of the country and wanted to experience this beauty firsthand. After completing her business negotiations with the suppliers, she boarded a flight to Bangkok. Although traveling alone can be risky, Miriam is experienced and knows how to navigate a foreign country safely. She prioritized her safety during her short vacation by following some important rules, avoiding going out alone after dark, keeping her valuables safe, and always being wary of strangers. Unfortunately, we cannot predict other people's intentions, making it difficult to know whether they might cause us harm. Soon after arriving in Bangkok, she took a trip to Pattaya, located in the southeast of Thailand. Just off the coast was Koh Si Chang, an island she wanted to explore. On Sunday, April 7, 2019, at the age of 20, Miriam bought a ferry ticket to Koh Si Chang for a few hours, planning to return to Pattaya in the evening. Her simple goal was to enjoy fresh local seafood, visit some of the island's ancient temples, and soak up the seaside atmosphere. By noon, Miriam had arrived on the island. She quickly rented a motorbike, a common mode of transportation in Thailand. Using Google Maps, she planned her route and set off on her adventure. One of her destinations was a white stone temple located on a hilltop. The temple was famous for housing the footprint of the Buddha and was established by the ruling Chakri dynasty, making it important to Buddhists. The temple was tucked away in a quiet location. Miriam loved being in peaceful places, away from the hustle and bustle of tourists. She had no idea what awaited her there. After reaching her destination, Miriam parked her motorbike near the flower stall at the foot of the hill. She greeted the vendor and headed toward the temple. The hike ahead was challenging and best suited for those in good physical condition. Surveillance footage captured Miriam climbing the stone steps to the monument. However, Miriam ascended the steps but never returned. This was puzzling because the stone steps were the only way down the hill. Her rented motorbike remained parked at the foot of the hill, near the flower stall. Although the temple is situated on a beautiful hill, there are no other attractions nearby, making it unclear why she took so long and why she did not return. As night fell and she had not yet contacted anyone, her relatives in Germany began to worry that something might have happened to her. The next morning, April 8, a Thai tourist walked along a deserted path leading to the white stone temple that housed the footprint of the Buddha. About halfway up, he noticed a small ravine beside the stairs. Curious, he went closer and was shocked to discover the body of a young woman with fair skin. She was found dead, lying between two large boulders, covered in branches, leaves, and old debris. The visitor quickly alerted the police to the gruesome discovery. Officers rapidly climbed the hillside to the site where the body was discovered. The victim was identified as a German woman named Miriam Milsap. After examining the scene, police determined that her death was not an accident. Miriam was found with a broken leg and multiple injuries to her head and face, consistent with being struck by a heavy object, such as a brick or stone. It was tragic when it was discovered that Miriam had been abused before her death. However, the exact circumstances surrounding her death remain unclear. The stone shrine dedicated to the Buddha has only one entrance and exit, which was monitored by a surveillance camera that recorded Miriam as she climbed the hill. It was soon revealed that an unidentified young man had been seen going up the stairs with Miriam, making him the prime suspect. The police quickly identified him. Security footage showed him arriving on a motorbike and parking at the foot of the hill. He spoke briefly to the florist and bought a small bouquet of marigolds before heading to the temple. The florist noticed the young man closely following Miriam and then saw him walking down the stone stairs alone. He was wearing dark clothes, and the florist thought his jacket and pants looked wet and had something red on them. Concerned, the florist asked the young man if everything was okay. The man said he had just fallen, sensing something was wrong. The florist tried to recall the young man's appearance and noted down the model of his motorbike and the license plate number. The florist then shared his observations about the suspicious man with the police. The police discovered that the motorbike belonged to a 24-year-old man named Ranakorn Romruin, a local resident of Koh Sichang Island. Ranakorn lived alone and owned a small boat as well as a motorbike. He worked as a beach cleaner during the day, where he paddled around in the boat, collected trash, and cleaned the beach. Locals described him as a quiet and solitary man. After work, Ranakorn would often go home, watch TV, and drink beer, leading a lifestyle similar to many other young people his age. However, few knew that he was struggling with serious personal problems. Ranakorn battled drug addiction and regularly used methamphetamine. The day after Miriam was murdered, Ranakorn was arrested as he returned home from work in the evening. He was taken to the police station for questioning, and a few hours later, he confessed to the crime. Ranakorn stated that on the morning of Sunday, April 7, he woke up, skipped breakfast, drank 2 beers. He then used methamphetamine and got on his motorbike to travel around the island. His trip ended at the foot of a temple. Ranakorn spotted Miriam as she was climbing the stone stairs. At that moment, an idea struck him. when he saw an attractive girl with fair skin at the foot of the hill. He noticed a flower stall and bought a small bouquet of marigolds. Ronicorn then followed Miriam up the stairs. When he caught up with her, he tried to strike up a conversation. Miriam felt uncomfortable, and after he gave her the flowers, he suggested they could be intimate on the hill before going to the temple. Miriam refused, but Ronicorn continued to ask inappropriate questions. Miriam became frightened and tried to run away from the stranger, but he kept chasing her. Eventually, he grabbed her and dragged her into the dense forest. Miriam screamed and struggled to escape, but there was no one around to help her. After he completed what he intended to do, Miriam found an opportunity to escape. She ran down the hill, putting as much distance as possible between herself and him. Meanwhile, Ronicorn had a disturbing thought. He realized he needed to catch up with her to eliminate any possibility of being caught. If he let her go, he would likely end up in jail. Ronicorn stood up, dusted himself off, and ran after Miriam. Unfortunately, in her panic, while descending the hill, she fell and injured her leg. Ronicorn caught up to her and picked up a large rock from the ground. Hitting her on the head, Miriam died from the injury. Ronicorn then dragged her up the hill, placed her on a rocky spot, and covered her with leaves, twigs, and old rubbish. However, the body was eventually discovered by a Thai tourist after committing the crime. Ronicorn returned home, quickly washed his bloody clothes, lay down on the couch, watched TV, and finished a pack of cigarettes. This was his last evening of freedom during the reenactment of the crime scene. Ronicorn recounted the final moments of Miriam's life while his head was covered with a blue bag. To protect his identity, Thai police closely monitored the investigation, and just 3 months after the tragedy, the trial began. The main evidence against Ronicorn included surveillance camera footage, a witness's testimony from the flower stall, and Ronicorn's own confession. Although Ronicorn did not directly apologize for his actions, his mother did so in court on his behalf. The mother said that she and Ronicorn did not live together and were unaware of her son's actions. His actions shocked her, and she urged the court to impose the harshest sentence on him. In Thailand, the maximum penalty for murder is the death penalty. Ronicorn's mother feared that if he were released, he might commit a similar crime and take the lives of others. She supported the court in imposing the death penalty on her son. Ronicorn is currently awaiting execution. The island community was horrified by the news of the death of 26-year-old Miriam. Thailand is generally a peaceful country, and it is sad that a local man would treat a tourist so cruelly. Koh Si Chang has never seen such brutality before, and the residents hope this incident will not disrupt their lives or deter visitors. The Koh Si Chang community came together to express their grief. People of all ages and occupations gathered at the site of Miriam's death. Carrying candles and flowers, they mourned, prayed for her soul, and offered their condolences to her family. Thailand's economy is heavily dependent on tourism, and negative publicity can be very damaging to the country's economy. This is why the Thai authorities prioritize the swift resolution of crimes involving tourists. However, there are times when details of such cases are kept under wraps and not shared with the public. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Samantha and Tessara Kresby. David Kresby comes from a family known for its success and respect. He is from Sacramento, California, and both he and his brother, along with their father, graduated from California State University. David earned an accounting degree with honors in 1983. His older brother, John, is the pride of the family, having become a professor of economics at Kansas State University. With his excellent academic performance, David easily found a job at a local bank, where he quickly rose to the position of CFO. However, the bank eventually closed, He then worked as a manager at a mortgage company in Sacramento. David has 2 children from his first marriage. However, his life took a difficult turn when his first wife died of a brain tumor. David devoted himself to providing for his children during this trying time. Fortunately, he soon met Kim, a woman he had known since college. Their friendship blossomed into a romantic relationship, and they began living together in 1994. Kim married David and adopted his children. In 1997, they welcomed a son, and 4 years later, they had twins, Tessara and Samantha, in total. David has 5 children with 2 women. In 2001, David moved to a new and promising bank, prompting his family to relocate to Matthews, a small town in the suburbs of Charlotte, North Carolina. By 2006, David Kresby was a vice president at a bank and lived with his family in a comfortable 3-story house in a prosperous area of Matthews. They had lived in this quiet neighborhood for nearly 5 years, which was considered an ideal place to raise children. The family shared a strong, loving bond and maintained a warm relationship with one another. David was regarded as a caring and active family man. They were actively involved in their local church, where David served on the finance committee. To many, it seemed that David had achieved his dream. What appeared to be a happy life actually concealed deeper problems. From a young age, David struggled with mental health issues on the surface. He seemed to be a kind, devoted, successful, hard-working, and intelligent husband and father. However, he often suffered from severe bouts of depression that would come and go without warning. His condition worsened after the death of his first wife, but it only began to improve when Kim entered his life. She did her best to support him, and they both believed that this would help him overcome his challenges. Unfortunately, it was not enough. David's mental health issues began when he was 20 years old. At that time, he faced typical challenges in love and difficulties in planning for the future, which left him in a state of sadness. Adult life turned out to be more difficult than he had anticipated. Despite this, David still managed to excel in everything he did and worked tirelessly, not realizing that his success came at a high cost. As a young man, David did not seek help and preferred to solve problems on his own. As an adult, his depression often stemmed from the increased demands of his job and the responsibilities he assumed. His family was aware of his difficulties, and his colleagues noticed when he occasionally fell into a state of depression. However, David usually recovered quite quickly. There were no serious consequences for his work life. People understood his situation. He could take a day off, but his colleagues covered for him and provided sick leave when necessary. Their support seemed justified because, while his depression was in remission, David excelled in his field. The situation became increasingly serious. David was a devout Catholic, as was his entire family, according to his faith. End life was considered a sin. Despite this belief, David frequently contemplated end life during his time as vice president and even attempted it several times without success. During this period, David chose to spend time outdoors, searching for a suitable place to end his life instead of working. His wife tried to intervene and save him during these moments. After each attempt, David promised his family that he would not try to commit end life again. David struggled with depression that he could not control. Simply promising himself not to harm himself did not help him dispel his dark thoughts. His frustration grew. Instead of feeling like harming himself, he began to have thoughts about harming others. One time, when David and Kim were stopped at a traffic light, he seriously considered driving into a crowd. His wife thought he was joking. Unaware of how sincere his feelings were at this time, David tried several prescription medications, but they were ineffective. His attempts to deal with his mental health issues on his own made him paranoid and withdrawn. He became increasingly anxious about losing his job and going bankrupt. Often imagining the worst-case scenarios, Kim encouraged him to see a psychiatrist, who prescribed him antidepressants. David agreed and committed to the treatment regimen the doctor gave him. David had been on one medication for years, but it caused him to gain weight, which frustrated him. Annoyed by this side effect, he decided to stop taking the medication and try something else. He returned to the psychiatrist, hoping to adjust his treatment regimen for better results. By 2006, he was very familiar with his mental health problems, which had become more frequent and intense during these times. He was haunted by thoughts of harming others. David often thought about ending his life voluntarily, but because of his promise not to harm himself, he considered harming others instead. Although he saw his doctor regularly, he never revealed these feelings. Hoping that a prescription medication would help him manage his difficulties, he feared losing everything he had built. He understood that if his doctor knew about his obsessive thoughts, it could lead to serious consequences, such as hospitalization, loss of his job, or separation from his wife and children. He tried not to think about harming others and fought against these thoughts. David's last appointment with a psychiatrist was on January 19, 2006. Shortly before the tragic events occurred, the psychiatrist prescribed new medication, believing that David was struggling with sleep problems and anxiety. He had also recently changed his previous medication, which could cause weight gain. The psychiatrist did not notice anything unusual. David was very good at hiding his emotions and preferred to rely on himself. On the morning of January 20, 2006, David's family was at home. Kim, David, and their 5-year-old twins, Samantha and Tessera, whom David adored, were all together. David was on sick leave due to his battle with depression. At that time, everything seemed normal, and there was no sign that anything was wrong. At 11:30 a.m., David received a call from his mother. It was a routine check-in. She was aware of his mental health issues and called at the same time every day to see how he was doing, and if he needed any support. They talked for about 15 minutes, during which David reassured her that everything was fine. His 3 older children were at school at the time, at 12:15 p.m., while Samantha and Tessera were having lunch. Kim was looking after them. She felt confident that nothing would happen to the children because David loved them very much. She believed that they would be safe with him. Kim had gone out to get a haircut after lunch. David worked on the computer, but then took a break to spend time with his daughters. He suggested they play hide and seek, and they scattered to find hiding places around the house. David went into the kitchen and laid out some knives on the table. He then began to search for the twins. He saw Samantha first. She was smiling and unaware of the dark thoughts in his mind. Deciding to end the game, he quietly took her to the kitchen. Suddenly, he picked her up and placed her on the kitchen table. He took a knife and began to attack Samantha. The little girl screamed and struggled, and then she stopped breathing, hearing strange noises. Tessera came out of hiding and saw her father attacking Samantha, even though she was only 5 years old. She sensed that something terrible was happening. Fearing for her own safety, she hid on the second floor of the house. Unfortunately, Tessera was easily discovered in the bathroom of the master bedroom. The little girl begged David not to hurt her, but David ignored her cries. He pinned her to the floor and began to attack her with a knife. Tessera cried, screamed, and fought fiercely against her father, but all in vain. Once a loving father, he had now left his 2 young daughters lifeless. David then considered end life, but ultimately decided against it. Instead of running away, he showered, changed clothes, and called 911. During the call, he calmly confessed that he had killed his 2 daughters and attempted CPR. Although he believed it was useless, as they were already dead, he answered the police's questions clearly, providing his details, his phone number, and his wife's location. He appeared calm rather than distressed and requested emergency assistance, expressing his desire to end his life. After the call ended, the police quickly arrived at David's home. David's home is located on Creek Road in an affluent area, where his family lives in a villa. It was surprising that such a tragic event could happen in a place known for its prosperity. When the police arrived, David was found sitting outside the house, waiting for them and for his wife Kim, who was still at the beauty salon, he surrendered and accompanied the police back to the house. Kim later returned home and learned of the situation. Initially, Kim feared that her husband had committed end life, but when she learned the truth, she was shocked. The police placed David under 24-hour surveillance and provided him with specialized clothing designed to prevent self-harm. Removing any dangerous objects from his immediate vicinity, the case attracted considerable public attention, as a prominent and wealthy man faced the possibility of the death penalty, which is legal in North Carolina. It is reported that David may reach a plea deal with the prosecution if he admits to 2 counts of first-degree murder. The prosecutor's office will agree not to pursue the death penalty as a result. David could face life in prison without parole. Many feel that this sentence is too lenient for the deaths of Samantha and Tessara, 2 innocent girls. During questioning, David mentioned that he had been dealing with depression and suggested that his actions were influenced by a new medication prescribed by his doctor. David has spoken openly about his illness, seemingly trying to shift the prosecutor's focus to his condition, which he believes caused the tragic events. He stated that he had struggled with depression for years and had finally reached a point where he could no longer bear it. Over the past few months, his condition had worsened significantly. He revealed that he had intended to harm strangers with his car, but also admitted that he had darker thoughts about his wife and 5 children while they slept. Amid his financial struggles, he was overwhelmed by the fear of losing his job as a bank vice president. He felt disillusioned by his inability to provide for his wife and children, which left him feeling unstable. On that day, he heard voices in his head telling him that there was no future, that everything was ruined, and that he had to kill his daughters. David believed that the twins were also suffering from depression, which was why they were not attending kindergarten. He eventually came to the disturbing conclusion that killing Samantha and Tessara might ease his own pain and prevent his mental health from deteriorating further. Kim shocked many by forgiving and supporting David. Despite his violent actions, she felt the death penalty was too harsh and believed it would not bring her children back to life. Despite her heartache over the tragedy, Kim has repeatedly told the media that executing David would only cause further harm to the family. She expressed relief that her husband did not commit end life before the police arrived. Kim believes that his actions stemmed from mental health issues that he could not control, including severe depression and psychosis. She remains hopeful that he will eventually recover and return to the loving and calm person he once was. The Supreme Court is reviewing the death penalty. Some believe that David deserves the death penalty for killing his 2 children. However, the prosecutor was reluctant to pursue this option because it would be difficult to convince all 12 jurors. As a result, the inquest continues to investigate more disturbing evidence beyond David's confession. David's attorneys have prepared a strong argument against the death penalty, emphasizing his long history of severe mental illness, which has spanned more than 2 decades. Prior to this tragic event, David had no criminal record. He was a devoted family man and a respectable citizen. There was no history of aggressive behavior in his past, and he had never harmed his wife or children. As Kim and other family members confirmed, the defense argued that on January 20, David's mental illness led to the tragic deaths of his 2 children. The attorneys, along with all of David's relatives, believed that he was experiencing a psychotic episode at the time of the incident. Kim stated that he had been working hard for years to control his mental health issues and had been successful. They had consulted with professionals, and he had been prescribed medication. However, Kim felt that the treatment he received was not effective enough. Over the years, the family continued to seek help and adhered to the treatment plan, ensuring that he took his medication as prescribed. A psychological evaluation revealed that David had more serious mental health problems than initially thought, rather than just depression and anxiety. He was diagnosed with psychosis. It became clear that the medications prescribed were not appropriate for his condition several years before the incident. David had been diagnosed with genital cancer and had been successfully treated on the day of the tragedy. He was scheduled for a follow-up appointment. His attorneys presented medical documents showing that he had been prescribed several medications, one for depression, another for anxiety, and a third to help him sleep while on the antidepressants. David gained more than 20 kg and had difficulty breathing, which forced him to stop taking the medication. His doctor then prescribed another medication in January, but it did not resolve his sleep problems. He finally returned to the doctor. Just one day before the murder, medical records show that David's treating physician removed his sedative and sleeping pills and prescribed a different sleeping pill instead. After this change, David began to notice alterations in his mental state, impairing his ability to think clearly. The day before the twins were murdered, he became delirious and acted erratically. Experiencing extreme mood swings, this exacerbated his anxiety about not being able to provide for his family. However, management at the bank where he worked described David as having an excellent work record, with no indication that he was in danger of losing his job. Despite this reassurance, David's mental state left him vulnerable to irrational fears. He worried that he might not receive a bonus from the bank, recalling that he had earned $45 the year before, but doubting that he would receive the same amount again. However, he later discovered that the bank had approved a large bonus during this difficult time. David was not in a clear state of mind and could not think rationally while awaiting the hearing in the case of Samantha and Tessara's murder. Kim visited her husband frequently. She repeatedly expressed her deep faith and love for him, believing that one day they would overcome the challenges caused by his illness and avoid such terrible tragedies. Kim only knew David as a kind and loving person. She believed that inadequate treatment led to the deaths of their children and the pain the family endured afterward. The scene of the crime was tragic. It is hard to imagine the pain Kim felt when she returned from the beauty salon to find the police and paramedics carrying her daughter's bodies. In fact, David's troubled thoughts began long before these tragic events. At the time, David was being treated with prescription medications. The initial treatment regimen helped control his negative thoughts to some extent, but things changed when adjustments were made. Experts later concluded that the new drugs had caused acute psychosis, according to David's own confession. When Samantha and Tessara were only 1 year old, he had thoughts of harming them. One day, while walking with the girls in the backyard, he hid a weapon in his pocket. Fortunately, he regained his composure and realized that he needed to stop. He convinced himself that he could overcome his challenges and that his family's financial situation would improve. David later returned to the doctor, but avoided discussing his thoughts of harming his children. Instead, he vaguely mentioned having bad thoughts about harming others and expressed his fear of losing his children and family by withholding information. He likely misled his doctors. As a result, he was prescribed medications that he had taken previously, which led to weight gain. In his confession, David admitted that, for many years, he had often felt like harming a family member, but he had been able to control these impulses until now. He believed that he had everything under control and could never actually act on the harmful thoughts. David recounted that after his wife got a haircut one morning, he was working on his computer when the obsessive thought returned. It urged him to kill his children. He thought that if he did so, all his worries would disappear because he would have no one to care for. David realized that his mental problems were related to his actions. During his initial interrogations, David responded coldly. When asked why he killed both girls instead of just one, he explained that because they were twins, they needed to die together. However, the situation changed when David received comprehensive treatment. It was only then that he understood the severity of his crime. He admitted that he had never shared his thoughts about killing his children. His wife, Kim, did not fully understand the gravity of her husband's condition. David's doctor was not held responsible after the tragedy. Citing David's failure to provide accurate information, The doctor was unaware of many of David's hidden struggles, which prevented him from fully assessing the situation. Furthermore, all medications have side effects that can vary from person to person, and doctors cannot predict such severe reactions. David received support and treatment while in prison, which had a positive impact on him. During his preliminary hearing, he began to understand the extent of his responsibility for his actions and fully admitted his guilt. Psychiatrists confirmed that he was fit to stand trial. David's family was shocked by what had happened. His father had seen him just a week before the tragic event. He appeared healthy and showed no signs of impending disaster. On July 30, 2006, the hearings took place. Ultimately, David Kresby reached a plea deal and pleaded guilty. While the prosecutor's office chose not to pursue the death penalty, this decision caused considerable controversy, dividing public opinion. With one group calling for the death penalty, the trial was brief, and the jury sentenced David Kresby to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The trial was short but filled with deep emotion. David's family cried, and he struggled to hold back tears as he came to terms with the pain his actions had caused. He felt he would be haunted by guilt for the rest of his life. Even the police officers who had arrived at the scene that day were in tears. A young officer went upstairs and discovered Tessera's body. He checked for a pulse, hoping she was still alive. The police carried the injured child down the stairs, praying that she would survive. However, when the doctors examined the body, it was clear that she had died from her injuries. What the police felt as a pulse may have been his own heartbeat. This story raises many questions. Was David truly unaware of what was happening at the time? Were his actions influenced by a psychotic episode? He appeared normal when he talked to his mother and wife and went to work. However, his actions were completely different. When his wife, Kim, left the house, everything seemed normal. But he caused a massacre right afterward. He considered end life, but decided against it and tried to calm down. So why didn't he try to control himself in the moment when he killed the child? Welcome back to our channel. Today, we will explore a new case, the case of April Milsap. What could happen to a young woman simply walking through a quiet suburban neighborhood that is considered one of the safest in America? Normally, there would be nothing to worry about, but when a real predator lurks in the shadows, even the safest places can become the scene of a horrific tragedy. April Milsap, 14 years old by the summer of 2014. She was living with her family in Armada, a small town in Michigan, USA. April was a friendly and sweet girl who attended a local high school. She was an only child, and her parents had divorced when she was 6. After the divorce, her mother began a relationship with another man, who later became April's stepfather. April quickly grew close to her stepfather, and they developed a warm bond. April was a cheerful girl with a sense of humor, always bringing joy to her family. Her positive attitude helped her form a close circle of friends. She was creative, loved drawing, stayed active, and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. Despite her young age, April seemed mature and independent. By the time she turned 14, she often walked her dog alone and enjoyed spending time with her friends while maintaining a close relationship with her family. April also had a boyfriend named Austin Schutt, who was a year older than her. They attended the same school and had been dating for about a year at the time of these events. In 2014, the town of Armada had a population of about 1.7 people. It was considered a safe and family-friendly place where everyone knew each other. However, as life sometimes proves, even the safest places can attract danger. Crimes in Armada were rare, but when they did occur, they caused significant alarm. On July 24, 2014, the summer holidays were in full swing. That day, April didn't have any plans to go out or meet friends. She slept until noon and spent most of the day on her computer, chatting with friends and playing games. Around 6 p.m., she decided to take her dog, Penny, for a walk. April often brought Penny along when she met friends or her boyfriend, Austin, That evening, she chose one of her usual walking routes, which she often used to relax. Her walks typically lasted no more than an hour. Her mother, Jennifer, waited for her at home without concern, but when an hour and a half passed and April still hadn't returned, Jennifer became increasingly anxious when April didn't respond to her calls or text messages. So she reached out to April's boyfriend, assuming they might be together. However, Austin told her he hadn't seen April all day and had only communicated with her online. Jennifer's worry deepened, and she began contacting April's friends and classmates, but no one knew where April could be. About half an hour later, there was a knock at the door, hoping it was April returning from her walk. Jennifer felt a brief sense of relief. Instead, she found Austin and his friends standing on the doorstep. They had come to check on April because they were also concerned. Austin then showed Jennifer a message he had received from April at 6:28 p.m., roughly 40 minutes after she had left the house to walk the dog. Although Austin initially said he hadn't heard from her, he admitted to seeing the message later, either because he hadn't noticed it right away or he had been out of network coverage at the time. The message contained a chilling statement. "They tried to kidnap me." Alarmed by this, Austin had immediately started searching for her, realizing the seriousness of the situation. Jennifer called her husband, who at work, alarmed. He left his job immediately to join the search. He joined Jennifer and Austin, and the three decided to split up to cover more ground along the routes April usually walked. Jennifer also contacted the police, who promptly joined the efforts to find April. Shortly afterward, April was found. A man and a woman jogging along one of the trails came across a dog on a leash. Penny, the dog, seemed extremely agitated. When the woman attempted to grab the leash, Penny ran off, but stopped periodically. As if trying to guide them somewhere, they followed Penny into a dense thicket, where they discovered the body of a girl. The victim was later identified as 14-year-old April Milsap by the time her family arrived. Forensic experts were already working at the site. In Armada, the local police force consisted of only 2 officers, neither of whom was trained for cases of this nature. Serious crimes were almost unheard of in the area, and the small force was sufficient for handling minor issues like petty theft. However, this case was different. None of the local officers had ever dealt with a violent murder, and their investigative resources were minimal. The sheriff immediately reached out to more capable authorities at the county level. Law enforcement from other regions was quickly brought in to assist with the investigation. As they had more resources and experience, April was discovered lying on her back at the bottom of a ravine. Her shoes had been removed and were found a few meters away. Her clothing and underwear had been pulled off, suggesting a clear abuse motive. However, further investigation revealed that she had not been abused. Detectives theorized that the attacker may have attempted but failed, possibly because April fought back fiercely or because something like a passerby or the dog interrupted the assault. Regardless, she was subjected to a brutal beating. Her body was covered in bruises, ranging from defensive wounds to severe injuries on her face, which was so disfigured it appeared almost crushed. The forensic examination identified at least 48 separate injuries, many concentrated on her face and neck. Her body was covered in dried blood. There were signs of compression on her neck, but they didn't match the typical patterns seen in manual strangulation or the use of an object. Instead, the injuries on her face and neck bore unusual marks, which forensic analysis confirmed were caused by the tread of a shoe. This indicated that the attacker had stomped on her repeatedly. The forensic report concluded that April's death was the result of being trampled. Marks resembling the sole of a large sneaker were found on her head and neck. Considering the level of violence and the potential motive, investigators believed the perpetrator was likely a large man. The forensic expert concluded that the attack lasted over 10 minutes, during which the girl endured immense agony before dying. Identifying the victim initially proved difficult due to the severe facial injuries, which rendered her unrecognizable. Similarly, Her mother was already unidentifiable from the start. The girl's stepmother, boyfriend, and the boyfriend's friend were brought in for police questioning to narrow down the list of possible suspects. The initial investigation focused on her mother, Jennifer, to determine if there were any events or threats that could be related to the case. However, investigators quickly determined that Jennifer had no conflicts, troubles, or unusual events related to her daughter's death. After ruling this possibility out, they turned their attention to April's boyfriend, Austin. To continue to clarify the details of the case, suspicion arose when Austin admitted that his relationship with the victim had been strained recently. They argued often and were on the brink of breaking up shortly before the murder. They had a heated argument. Adding to investigators' doubts was a chilling message April had sent to Austin just before the crime. She told him that someone had attempted to kidnap her, but he chose to ignore this alarming warning. Austin claimed he couldn't respond because the message arrived too late for him to see it. It seems there was a delay in delivery. Detectives noted that after receiving the message, he reacted very slowly, did not inform the police, and instead decided to search for her on his own. Austin explained that he was still upset with his girlfriend and believed the message was an attempt to manipulate him. He thought she was trying to provoke his attention and concern to push him toward reconciliation, not realizing the gravity of the situation regarding the quarrel. Austin insisted that April's behavior was incomprehensible. The most recent conflict had seemingly come out of nowhere, and he couldn't clearly explain the reasons behind their disagreements. Instead, he placed the blame on her. This only deepened the detective's suspicions, as it suggested Austin might have had a motive for the attack. In many cases, such incidents are committed by partners. As a result, the officers decided to detain him longer and asked him to tell them how his day went in all the details in order to analyze his movements and establish an alibi. Austin said that around 4 p.m., he met a friend to help carry a TV into a house. Afterward, they went to the nearest McDonald's for a snack. His account was later confirmed by surveillance camera footage from the cafe, which showed him there at the specified time, around 6:30 p.m. Just a few minutes after the message about the attempted kidnapping was sent, it became clear that Austin could not have been involved in the murder, since Austin was ruled out as the killer. Investigators turned their attention to the victim's mobile phone, hoping it might provide crucial information. They suspected April might have received a message from the stalker pursuing her, but her mobile phone could not be found at the crime scene. Detectives theorized that the killer had taken it, turned it off to prevent tracking, and discarded it elsewhere to find the phone and other evidence. A thorough search was conducted along the route April was believed to have taken, but no clues were initially found. Law enforcement, specialized dogs, and the FBI joined the search effort after nearly a full day of searching with no results. A breakthrough occurred the next day. The girl's mobile phone was discovered about a kilometer from the crime scene and was immediately sent to a forensic lab for analysis around the same time. News of the brutal attack spread widely through local newspapers and TV channels. Authorities appealed for witnesses who might have noticed anything unusual on the trail near the time of the crime. However, in the early stages, this only heightened public fear and anxiety. What shocked people most was the sheer brutality of the attack and the fact that it occurred in broad daylight, leaving everyone feeling unsafe. Then, a girl came forward to the police with potentially valuable information. She explained that around 6 p.m. on the day April was killed, she was at home looking out her window when she noticed a white van she had never seen before passing by. A man was driving, with another young man in the passenger seat. The van was moving very slowly, as if the occupants were searching for something or someone. This struck her as odd. When they noticed her watching from the window, they stopped and stared at her, even pointing toward her house. The encounter made her feel uneasy. Afterward, they drove away. Upon hearing about April's murder, the girl became worried that these two men might have been involved. She feared they could have spotted April as a target and attacked her. Detectives found this information reliable and important to the investigation. They considered it plausible that a white van had been driving around the area looking for a victim, and April was unfortunate enough to catch the men's attention. The police appealed to the public once again, sharing a description of the white van and a composite sketch of the two men inside, hoping to gather more reliable leads. The following day, a man and his friend contacted the police. They admitted to driving a van in the area that evening. They explained that they were construction workers and had been driving slowly through the neighborhood because the driver wanted to show his colleague some houses where he had previously worked. One of these houses happened to be where the girl lived. Their account was verified, and local residents confirmed their story. Clearing them of suspicion, the men were eager to assist the investigation in any way they could. The day after the incident, several people contacted the police to report a suspicious motorcycle and its driver. Witnesses reported seeing a schoolgirl walking her dog along a path around 6:30 p.m. They noted that she wasn't alone at the time. She was accompanied by an older man who was pushing his motorcycle by hand. The two appeared to be walking and talking casually at the time. The witnesses assumed the man was her father, as his behavior seemed calm and April showed no signs of fear. However, upon reflecting on the situation later, doubts about the man began to emerge. None of April's friends or family recognized him based on the description provided, suggesting he was a complete stranger to her, according to witnesses. This encounter occurred around the same time April had texted her boyfriend about an attempted kidnapping, raising further suspicions about the man, since there were very few motorcyclists in town. The man and his unusual motorcycle quickly caught the attention of locals. The motorcycle was described as having a rare blue and white color scheme, making it easy to identify thanks to this detailed description. Police located a motorcycle matching it just 3 days after April's murder, on April 27, 2014. It was found parked in the driveway of a local house. When officers arrived, the motorcycle was still there. The officers approached a man working in the garden, who told them the motorcycle did not belong to him. Instead, it belonged to his 32-year-old friend, James Donald Van Callis, who lived in the neighboring town. About 30 kilometers from Armada, this information was verified. On April 28, officers met with James, the owner of the motorcycle, to question him about his whereabouts on the day April was killed. From the start, James was cooperative and willing to answer all questions. He claimed he had been at a friend's house in Armada during that time, and his friend confirmed the alibi. However, authorities found the alibi unreliable, as the witness was a friend who might have been covering for him. Additionally, there were minor discrepancies in the timeline. When asked about the shoes he wore that day, James provided a pair of white sneakers. However, the tread on the shoes did not match the marks found on the victim's body. Detectives decided to take a closer look at James to eliminate him as a potential suspect. While he had a criminal record, it was not for violent offenses. His convictions included breaking, as well as failing to pay child support, and the robberies occurring in 2005 and 2006. However, upon reviewing James's background, the police uncovered something far more alarming. His father, James Bernard Van Callis, was a registered abuse offender. The elder James Bernard had been convicted of abusing a 13-year-old minor at the time. Both men lived in the same family home. Authorities considered the possibility that James Bernard and James Donald might be involved in criminal activities. However, the investigation primarily focused on the son, as witnesses had identified a middle-aged man matching the witness's description. Searches of their home revealed that James Bernard and James Donald were growing the territory of the prohibited plant. The quantity was so large that they were arrested and charged with distributing the prohibited banned substance. This allowed law enforcement to detain them, ensuring public safety and preventing the suspects from fleeing the state. While the investigation continued, the police thoroughly inspected all the shoes found in the men's house, but none matched the tread marks found on the victim's body. Additionally, numerous DNA tests were conducted on the clothing, but no traces linked to April were discovered. However, forensic experts who examined the motorcycle were confident that James Donald had used strong cleaning agents shortly before it was seized by the police for analysis. They suspected this was an attempt to remove evidence. James Donald was quite successful. As the police no traces were found, the detectives quickly confirmed their theory. When James Donald's girlfriend contacted the police, she reported that on the day of the murder, in April, she came home to find he meticulously cleaning his shoes, motorcycle, and helmet with strong disinfectants. This unusual behavior made her suspicious. The injuries on the victim's head were consistent with marks that could have been caused by a helmet, leading investigators to believe James Donald might have used it during the assault. She also revealed that he had traveled by car that day to a nearby town where the victim lived. Supposedly to visit his friend, James Donald's girlfriend described a pair of black and white sneakers that James Donald frequently wore and loved. However, these shoes did not match the ones he handed over to detectives when they questioned him. After that night, she never saw those sneakers again, leading her to believe James Donald had disposed of them. Fearing he couldn't fully clean away the evidence, she further detailed her troubling relationship with James Donald, describing him as extremely abusive and controlling. Recently, she had felt more like his hostage or property than his girlfriend. He tightly controlled every aspect of her life, even forbidding her from leaving the house unless he accompanied her. She suspected him from the start, but feared he would kill her if she contacted the police. Now that James Bernard and James Donald had been arrested, she could finally speak freely. According to James Donald's own admission to his girlfriend, he claimed he was cleaning his belongings because they had been stained with machine oil while fixing his motorbike. However, she remained unconvinced. The police needed to confirm that the sneakers she described matched the ones James Donald commonly wore. They found photos on his social media page showing him wearing sneakers identical to her description, although James Donald had disposed of the pair he wore during the murder. The police located and purchased the same model when they compared the tread pattern to the marks on the victim's body. Forensic experts found an exact match. The investigation revealed that April had been trampled to death with shoes James Donald had purchased about a year before the attack. Further evidence was found on his computer, where investigators uncovered his disturbing interest in much younger girls. Additionally, crucial information came from April's phone using FBI lab analysis. It was discovered that she had a fitness app installed, which monitored her movements, steps, and heart rate, among other data. Shortly after sending a worrying message to her boyfriend, Austin, the data showed she suddenly began running. As if trying to escape from someone, James Donald reportedly approached the girl on his motorcycle and offered her something. Shortly afterward, she sent her boyfriend a message about an attempted kidnapping. Then she ran really fast to escape her pursuer. Minutes later, her fitness app recorded a sudden, chaotic, and extremely fast increase in her movements, lasting 10 to 15 minutes. This appears to have been the moment she fought for her life. Later, the criminal returned to his vehicle with the April's phone. The app recorded a steady speed of about 20 kilometers per hour, which continued until the phone was discarded about a kilometer from the attack site. Surveillance cameras along the biker's route captured footage of the motorcycle and identified the suspect as 32-year-old James Donald. Additionally, geolocation data from his mobile phone confirmed that, at the time of the attack, he was not with a friend, as he claimed, but near the crime scene. By this point, everyone was certain of his involvement in the murder. There was enough evidence to charge him with April's murder and proceed to court. However, a significant challenge remained: the lack of direct evidence. The police were unable to find any DNA linking James Donald to the victim. Of course, against this background, lawyers could effectively refer to indirectly provided evidence. Forensic experts were unable to find traces of the victim's blood on his belongings, equipment, or helmet. James Donald had meticulously cleaned everything and disposed of all incriminating items. It was clear that the man was highly experienced in this case. The prosecutor's office decided to proceed with the charges despite relying on indirect evidence. These evidences was enough to convince the jury of James Donald's guilt in October 2014. 3 months after the crime, James was formally charged, and the trial was scheduled for early 2016. It was believed that he attacked a teenage girl, April. After she rejected his advances, James Donald had spent considerable time online researching ways to attract much younger girls, particularly minors. But none of the advice seemed to work. Tragically, when April refused him, he reacted violently and attacked her. The defense argued that the prosecution lacked definitive proof of James's guilt and claimed the case was built entirely on circumstantial evidence, although James maintained his innocence. His arguments were unconvincing. As a last resort, his lawyer emphasized that James Donald had no prior record of serious crimes. However, this was not enough to sway the jury. After several hours of deliberation, the jury unanimously found him guilty of attempted kidnapping, abuse, and first-degree murder. James Donald Van Callis was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During the sentencing, April's mother spoke extensively. She expressed her satisfaction with the court's decision, relieved that the perpetrator would never be released. She was horrified that her child's life had been taken by an adult man simply because his advances were rejected. His actions and intentions were criminal from the start, but the level of cruelty he displayed was unimaginable. Despite this, James refused to admit his guilt or show any remorse. He continued to claim his innocence. Even after his conviction, he attempted to overturn the court's decision by filing an appeal with his lawyer, but it was unsuccessful. Now, he remains in prison for committing a heinous crime against an innocent young girl, April Milsap, in April's memory. A memorial garden was created near the spot where her life was tragically taken. A small statue of her dog, Penny, stands in the garden to honor the pet who led strangers to the scene of the crime. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, United States. His father, chemist Lionel Herbert Dahmer, and his mother, Joyce Annette Dahmer, faced various challenges. Joyce struggled with depression and possibly other mental health issues, which required her to take large amounts of medication, even during her pregnancy. Despite these difficulties, their first child, Jeffrey, was born healthy and displayed a cheerful and curious personality in his early years. However, when he was about 5 years old, he developed a double inguinal hernia and required surgery. Initially, Jeffrey was described as an active and cheerful child, but after the surgery, his parents observed a change in his demeanor. He seemed more withdrawn and showed signs of depression. One day, Jeffrey witnessed his father taking an animal carcass from under the house and placing it on a tray. The sight caught Jeffrey's attention, and he became curious. Without hesitation, he began playing with it. His father, Lionel, whose job and academic career required him to move several times, eventually earned a doctorate in chemistry. This achievement led Jeffrey's family to settle in Bath, Ohio, where they found a large plot of land surrounded by trees. After moving to Ohio, Jeffrey began to avoid social interaction, preferring solitude. However, he cherished the time he spent with his father, participating in various activities together, such as fishing. Jeffrey enjoyed watching his father prepare fish and was curious about what was inside them. Lionel noticed this passion in his son and suggested that he learn taxidermy. Although Jeffrey did not experience physical abuse at home, he grew up in a tense atmosphere. His parents, Lionel and Joyce, argued frequently. Lionel often criticized Joyce for not taking good care of their son, while Joyce expressed frustration with Lionel's long hours at work and school, feeling that he was neglecting the family. Over time, they realized that Jeffrey was quite withdrawn and had difficulty connecting with others. When Jeffrey was 7, he got his first pet, a dog. This brought him immense joy, and he took great care of the dog, even bringing it along when he explored the area for animal carcasses. At the same time, Joyce became pregnant with their second child. To help Jeffrey feel included, his parents allowed him to choose a name for his younger brother, which he decided would be David. Jeffrey attended primary school in Bath, where his father made efforts to encourage him to socialize with other children. Although these efforts were largely unsuccessful, on weekends, Lionel spent time with Jeffrey, tending to the garden and bees together, and attending local fairs. Their relationship was strong, and Jeffrey even wrote poems for his father during this time. His mother, Joyce, was hospitalized for depression and anxiety, which was a difficult period for the family. When Jeffrey entered secondary school, he continued to enjoy dissecting animals and began to explore his abuse. During this time, he kissed a boy from the neighborhood, which led him to realize that he was attracted to boys. Although he struggled to accept this part of himself, Jeffrey faced increasing anxiety due to his father Lionel's homophobic views. Throughout high school, he endured bullying. To cope with the challenges around him, he turned to alcohol. This dependence on alcohol led him to come to school drunk and even drink during class. As a result, he was often reprimanded and disciplined. His behavior varied greatly. Sometimes he was the center of attention, while at other times he was very shy in school. Jeffrey often engaged in behavior that was considered humorous or eccentric. He acted as the class clown, frequently imitating epileptic seizures and making sheep noises during class. As he grew older, he even began drawing chalk sketches of human bodies on the classroom floor. Around the age of 14 or 15, Jeffrey began to experience disturbing obsessive thoughts related to sex. This struggle intensified over time, leading him to develop various fantasies. However, unlike typical teenage fantasies, Jeffrey's were more disturbing. Jeffrey found his senior year of high school particularly challenging. Because his parents decided to get a divorce, Lionel moved away and took refuge in a hotel, while Jeffrey's mother also decided to leave home, taking her youngest son, David, with her and leaving Jeffrey alone. Just a few weeks after graduating, he began to explore his fantasies more freely. Jeffrey's fantasies began to take shape in a disturbing way. He often thought about a young man he had met while playing sports on his way home. This man frequently jogged in the evenings, shirtless, and Jeffrey found himself drawn to him. Jeffrey then imagined a scenario where he would hide in the bushes, and when the man passed by, Jeffrey would attack him and take him home. However, on the day, Jeffrey decided to make this fantasy a reality. The young man did not show up for his usual jog. Another fantasy that Jeffrey cherished was picking up a hitchhiker and taking him home. In this scenario, they would share an intimate moment and eventually live together in harmony. This fantasy became a reality in 1978 when Jeffrey was driving down the road and spotted a young hitchhiker who fit his ideal type. Jeffrey stopped and offered the young man a ride in his car. The young man, eager to go to the summer music festival, accepted Jeffrey's invitation to have a beer at his house first. His name was Stephen Hicks, and he had just turned 18. They returned to Jeffrey's house together after drinking a few beers. Stephen asked Jeffrey to fulfill his promise to take him to the festival. Jeffrey hesitated, and an argument ensued. Eventually, Stephen decided to leave, which escalated the situation. In a fit of rage, Jeffrey hit Stephen with a dumbbell, causing him to fall to the floor, unconscious. In a panic, Jeffrey strangled Stephen until he stopped breathing. Jeffrey then processed Stephen's body, placing it in 5 black trash bags. He loaded the bags into his car and drove off to find a place to dispose of them. Jeffrey began to drive erratically and out of his lane, The patrolman saw Jeffrey and asked him why he was driving like that. Jeffrey confided in the officer about his struggles with insomnia and his parents' recent divorce. Expressing feelings of hopelessness about his life, he remained polite and calm throughout the conversation. When the officer asked about the car, he explained that it was full of trash and that he was looking for a place to properly dispose of it. Jeffrey made a good impression on the officer, who asked him to return home. Jeffrey complied and returned to his house with the trash bags containing Stephen's body. He eventually hid the bags in the basement. The next day, he continued to process Stephen's body. Attempting to crush the bones, he then scattered them in various locations behind the house. In the days that followed, Jeffrey paid attention to newspapers and news reports, hoping to find any updates on the missing man. However, he found none. He had committed a serious crime, but it was still a secret. This prompted him to repeat his crime. A week after Jeffrey's mother, Joyce, left home, Lionel found his son living alone and increasingly anxious. He encouraged Jeffrey to find a job, but Jeffrey showed little interest instead. He spent his days drinking. To help, Lionel took him to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and arranged sessions with psychologists. Lionel encouraged Jeffrey to pursue his studies at Ohio University. Although Jeffrey did not outright refuse, he continued to drink and think about Stephen's murder. In the following months, he donated blood in exchange for money to buy alcohol. By the end of the semester, his academic difficulties led to his expulsion from the university. However, Lionel was determined and convinced Jeffrey to enlist. Believing that military discipline could have a positive impact on him, Jeffrey complied and successfully passed the selection process. His passion for medical care took him to San Antonio, Texas, where he trained to become a military medic. Allowing him to gain a deeper understanding of human anatomy, Jeffrey eventually found his passion in his work. After 6 months, he had changed dramatically. Military physical training not only improved his physique, but also made him more sociable. For the first time, Lionel witnessed his son smile, although not while on leave. After completing his training, Jeffrey was deployed to a base in Germany. Unfortunately, his struggles with alcohol were not resolved, and when the authorities learned of the problem, he was discharged from the military upon returning to the United States. Jeffrey chose to distance himself from his father instead of going home. He settled in Miami, where he rented a hotel room and found work at a diner. At first, his life seemed okay, but it quickly became unstable. Jeffrey drank more and soon found himself unable to afford a hotel room, forcing him to sleep on the beach. Realizing that he could not continue like this, he decided to ask his father for financial help. Lionel, understanding that giving his son money might cause him to drink more, Lionel bought Jeffrey a ticket home instead, determined not to give up. Lionel committed to helping his son find a better path forward. Lionel picked Jeffrey up from the airport. Jeffrey greeted him with a bright smile, which initially led Lionel to believe that his son was simply happy to see him. However, it soon became clear that Jeffrey had consumed a significant amount of alcohol before the flight. Faced with this reality, Lionel decided that the best course of action would be to send Jeffrey to live with his grandmother in Milwaukee. During his time with her, Jeffrey matured considerably. He developed a deep respect for his grandmother, who, by many accounts, was the only person he felt truly close to. Jeffrey helped her with various chores around the house and even attended church with her. During the first few weeks, Jeffrey began reading the Bible, which helped him alleviate some of his negative thoughts. However, he still struggled with his fantasies. One day, he stole a male mannequin from a clothing store and hid it in his closet. He saw the mannequin as the perfect companion because it never rejected him, made no demands, and inspired him. However, one day, his grandmother discovered the mannequin and was horrified. She insisted that Jeffrey leave the house, but he calmed her down by promising to get rid of it one day. While sitting in the library, a man approached Jeffrey and handed him a note instructing him to meet in the men's room. Although Jeffrey chose not to accept the invitation, The incident sparked something within him, and after 9 years, his repressed desires resurfaced. In 1985, Jeffrey frequented the sauna, looking for men to satisfy his desires. When he found someone who interested him, he would invite them out for a drink. However, he would secretly put sleeping pills in their drinks. When the victim passed out, Jeffrey would lie down next to them. After one of his victims was poisoned and hospitalized, Jeffrey was banned from the club he frequented. Despite this, he continued to seek abuse partners in other bars and clubs. He preferred muscular young men and did not care about their skin color or hair color. In November 1987, Jeffrey met a man named Stephen Tuomi, a dancer and waiter from Michigan. They fell in love and decided to spend some time alone together. They rented a room at the Ambassador Hotel in Milwaukee, where Jeffrey offered Stephen a cocktail that had been spiked with sleeping pills. When Jeffrey woke up the next morning, he found bruises on Stephen Tuomi's forearms and chest, along with blood coming from his mouth. Jeffrey did not remember killing Stephen and could not believe it had happened. However, he was in the same room as the corpse, which prompted him to quickly leave the hotel, cross the street, and buy a suitcase. He returned to the hotel, placed Stephen's body in the suitcase, paid the bill in the lobby, and called a taxi. A hotel employee helped Jeffrey carry the suitcase, which was so heavy that the employee jokingly asked if there was a body inside. Jeffrey replied, "Yes," and they both laughed. Unaware that the employee was helping to dispose of a body, Jeffrey then went to his grandmother's house with the suitcase and secretly took it to the basement. He began to process Stephen Tuomi's body. He placed it in trash bags and then moved the bags containing the body into the trash. Several months later, Stephen Tuomi's relatives filed a missing persons report after he was last seen the night he met Jeffrey while working as a waiter, although police initially believed that Stephen had simply left. His family did not accept this explanation. They had been unable to contact him, and his belongings were still in his house. However, the investigation stalled, and there was no explanation for Stephen Tuomi's disappearance. After not being held accountable for his actions, Jeffrey increasingly embraced his dark desires and became a serial killer. Over the next 5 years, he committed multiple murders on his free nights and weekends. After 3 months of searching for new victims, Jeffrey met a 14-year-old boy at a bus stop near a club. Jeffrey approached the boy and offered to pay him $50 to sleep with him, and unfortunately, the boy accepted the offer. They took the bus to Jeffrey's grandmother's house, where she was sleeping. While they went down to the basement, there, Jeffrey drugged the boy and then strangled him. He became more perverted, abusing the boy while he was dead. As the body began to decompose, Jeffrey treated it like those of his previous victims. He began to dispose of the body of James Dox Tater. He packed the body in plastic bags and threw it in the trash. The victim's name was James Dox Tater, according to the Tampa Bay Times. James had run away from home 2 days earlier to escape his abusive stepfather, although his mother filed a complaint. Police showed little interest in finding him. Jeffrey's fourth victim was Richard Guerrero, a 22-year-old Hispanic man. They met outside a gay bar called Phoenix. Jeffrey lured Richard to his grandmother's house, promising to pay him to spend the night in the basement. Jeffrey drugged Richard with sleeping pills, then strangled him with a leather strap and began abusing him after he was dead. After satisfying his desires, Jeffrey put the body parts in garbage bags, which were picked up by a garbage service the next day. Richard's family urged the police to investigate his disappearance, but the officers believed he had left home voluntarily. However, Richard's sister believed otherwise and convinced her relatives to hire a private investigator. Richard's father, who worked at a golf course, spent all his savings on the investigator. But it turned out that the investigator was a fraud. Meanwhile, Richard's mother prayed daily for his safe return. Jeffrey's grandmother asked him to move out because she was fed up with him. He was no longer the grandson she used to go to church with. His drinking, his habit of bringing young men to her house late at night, and the stench from the basement and garage were too much for her to bear. As a result, Jeffrey had to find a new place to live. He rented a small apartment, where he stayed for a while as he prepared for his next victim. Jeffrey then found his fifth potential victim, a 13-year-old boy who came to his apartment. They met on the street, where Jeffrey offered to pay the boy in exchange for allowing him to take pictures. However, when Jeffrey tried to touch the boy got scared and ran away. The 13-year-old then informed his parents about the incident, and they reported it to the police. As a result, Jeffrey was arrested and charged with harassment. He received a 1-year sentence at the Milwaukee Correctional Center. Although he was allowed to leave during the day to go to work, he was required to return to the facility at night, just days before his sentence began. Jeffrey met his sixth victim, a 24-year-old man named Anthony Sears. On March 25, 1989, Jeffrey and Anthony met at a bar, and when the bar closed, they decided to spend the night together. They could not go to Anthony's house because his girlfriend was there. Jeffrey asked a friend to drive them to his grandmother's house when they arrived. He took Anthony to the basement and committed his usual act. However, this time was different. After disposing of the body, he put it in several different garbage bags. Some of Anthony's remains he threw in the trash, while others he kept in his locker at work. During Jeffrey's trial, his lawyer successfully reduced his sentence to just 10 months in a rehabilitation center. Jeffrey's father wrote to the judge, asking that Jeffrey be allowed to attend an alcohol treatment program while incarcerated. However, the judge received the letter too late, and Jeffrey was released without undergoing any rehabilitation. After his release, Jeffrey upgraded the security in his apartment by installing cameras and an alarm system. On June 24, 1990, Jeffrey went on a killing spree while at one of his favorite bars. He noticed a man named Raymond Smith. Jeffrey drugged Raymond and abused him before killing him. Just a month after killing Raymond, Jeffrey targeted another victim, 27-year-old Edward Smith. Edward was lured in with an offer of $100 to have his picture taken. With Jeffrey pretending to be a photographer, Edward was last seen alive talking to Jeffrey at a club. In September 1990, Jeffrey murdered his eighth victim, 22-year-old Ernest Miller. Ernest was attractive and healthy, and he worked as a dancer. He agreed to pose for photos in Jeffrey's apartment for $50, which put him in a dangerous situation. Jeffrey followed his usual pattern, plied Ernest with a mixture of alcohol and strong drugs. And this time, however, Ernest woke up before Jeffrey could strangle him. Resulting in a struggle, Jeffrey attacked Ernest with a knife. After killing him, Jeffrey disposed of the body as he had done with his other victims. But this time, he took a more disturbing step. Not only did he handling of the body, he also put it in the freezer for later use. The foul smell emanating from Jeffrey's apartment caused complaints from neighbors. To explain the smell, Jeffrey claimed that his meat refrigerator had broken down. To solve the problem, he bought a large plastic barrel and filled it with acid to destroy the body parts. Although he was able to remove some of the evidence, the smell remained. It seemed that Jeffrey did not care about the complaints from the neighbors. On September 24, 1990, Jeffrey continued his killing spree, targeting David Thomas, a 22-year-old man whom he had met at the Grand Avenue Mall. Jeffrey convinced David to return to his apartment for a few drinks, offering additional money if he posed for a photo. After giving David a drink laced with sedatives, Jeffrey found himself not attracted to him, but was afraid David would be angry when he found out he was drugged. As a result, Jeffrey strangled him. He took photos of handling of the body disposal and kept those photos for unknown reasons. Jeffrey stopped killing for 4 months. He met his next victim in February 1991. This victim, his 10th, was 17-year-old Curtis Straughter. Curtis had just lost his job as a nurse and was looking forward to becoming a model and attending college. They met at a bus stop, tragically. This was not the end of Jeffrey's list of victims. Just 2 months later, he met Errol Lindsay, a 19-year-old boy who was also lured by the promise of money to take pictures. The next victim was 31-year-old Tony Hughes. Tony, who had lost his hearing as a child due to medication, was cheerful and sociable. He loved to dance and made friends easily. Tony was last seen on May 24, 1991, at a club. That night, Jeffrey invited him to his house, where he continued his killing spree. Unfortunately, Tony's body was left in Jeffrey's apartment for several days before being dumped in a dumpster on May 26, 1991. A tragic chapter unfolded when Jeffrey met Konarak Synthesomphone, a 14-year-old Laotian teenager. Konarak was the younger brother of a previous victim who had escaped from Jeffrey. The situation was heartbreaking. Konarak had accepted money from Jeffrey to help his family, who was struggling financially and faced challenges due to their limited English skills. Konarak had been drugged by Jeffrey. After ensuring that Konarak was unconscious, Jeffrey left to buy alcohol, planning to strangle him upon his return. However, Konarak regained consciousness and escaped from the apartment. He wandered the streets until he encountered two girls, who were the nieces of Jeffrey Dahmer's next-door neighbor. The girls saw Konarak, who was injured, and they called 911 for help. The police, along with paramedics, rushed to the scene. When they arrived, they found Konarak lying in the middle of the road. They picked him up and placed him in a nearby building. When they began asking him questions, Jeffrey turned around, claiming that Konarak was his boyfriend, with whom he had just had a fight, and that he had been drinking heavily. The police accepted Jeffrey's explanation. The two girls begged the police to check Jeffrey's identification, but they refused. They urged the officers to listen to them. Pointing out the bruises and cuts on Konarak's body, the girls insisted that they knew the boy and that he was definitely a minor. The officers rudely told the girls to be quiet and even threatened to arrest them for trying to help Konarak. Had the officers checked Jeffrey's identification, they would have discovered that he was on mandatory parole for a previous conviction for molesting Konarak's brother. Instead, both officers assisted Jeffrey in taking Konarak back to his apartment, and one officer even placed him on the sofa. Once inside the apartment, the officers detected a foul odor, which Jeffrey explained was from a broken refrigerator filled with rotting meat that he had not disposed of. Surprisingly, the officers did not find anything suspicious. Jeffrey even showed them pictures of Konarak that he had taken earlier. Another alarming detail that the police overlooked was the body of Tony Hughes in the bedroom. The police left the scene, but the two girls called them back to check if they needed to identify themselves as witnesses. Unfortunately, the police dismissed their concerns, claiming it was just a disagreement between two adult partners. When Jeffrey was left alone with Konarak, he decided to inject hydrochloric acid into the boy's head. He did this to create a zombie. He had always dreamed of having a companion who would obey his every command without question. These experiments ultimately led to Konarak's death. Jeffrey then handling of the body. Konarak's, the next victim added to Jeffrey's list, was 20-year-old Matt Turner, whom he met at a bus stop. Matt accepted Jeffrey's offer to travel to Milwaukee for a professional photo shoot. At his apartment, Jeffrey drugged, strangled, and handling of the body. Matt's. On July 5, 23-year-old Jeremiah Weinberger became Jeffrey's victim. They met at a bar in Chicago, and Jeremiah went to Jeffrey's apartment with the promise of spending the weekend with him. Jeffrey then drugged Jeremiah and injected boiling water into his skull twice, causing him to fall into a coma and die 2 days later. Oliver Lacey, a 23-year-old athlete, accepted an offer for a photo shoot for money and accompanied Jeffrey to his apartment. There, Lacey and Jeffrey engage in intimate activities. Just 4 days later, on July 19, Jeffrey lured 25-year-old Joseph Braidhoff to his apartment. Joseph was strangled and laid out on Jeffrey's bed, covered with a sheet. For 2 days, on July 21, Jeffrey began handling of the body. Joseph's. On July 22, 1991, Jeffrey approached a group of 3 friends at a bar while they were drinking. He introduced himself as a photographer and paid $100 to anyone to pose for photos. Only one A 32-year-old homeless man named Tracy Edwards agreed. Jeffrey invited Tracy to his apartment and mixed him a cocktail, which he offered to all of his victims. However, Tracy, being as smart as he was, noticed a strange taste in the drink and decided not to finish it. Jeffrey then attempted to be intimate with Tracy, but Tracy repeatedly refused. Eventually, Jeffrey handcuffed one of Tracy's hands, leading to a struggle. During the fight, Jeffrey grabbed a knife, but Tracy fought back, hit Jeffrey, and escaped from the apartment. On the street, Tracy spotted a police car and informed the officers about the incident. They accompanied him to Jeffrey's apartment. Jeffrey tried to prevent the police from searching his place, but it was extremely dirty, and a strong stench filled the air. While going through boxes in Jeffrey's apartment, the police discovered gruesome photos of his victims. It was clear that they were dealing with a serial killer. This was the beginning of the end for Jeffrey Dahmer. The police searched the apartment and arrested Jeffrey. Inside the refrigerator, they discovered numerous human body parts. In a container filled with acid, they found more human body parts. They also found photographs that not only revealed the bodies of the victims, but also documented the many abuses Jeffrey had committed against them. Jeffrey felt relieved that he no longer had to hide such a secret that he had kept for so many years. When he realized that he would have to face the consequences of his actions, he chose to confess everything. His confession took 6 weeks to complete and spanned 159 pages, detailing every aspect of his crimes, from his first murder to his last victim. Jeffrey explained that at first, he just wanted to lie next to the men he had kidnapped. But over time, his desires became increasingly horrific. He admitted that the only way to keep his victims with him forever was to kill them. Jeffrey Dahmer claimed that he did not want to kill. Instead, he wanted a zombie-like companion that he could control indefinitely. Psychologists who worked with Jeffrey concluded that his motive was not abuse, but a desire for control. After Jeffrey's detailed confession, the court no longer had to prove his guilt. It only needed to determine his sanity. At the time, Wisconsin did not have the death penalty. If he were found insane, he would have been committed to a mental hospital indefinitely. Although there was a possibility that he could be released in the future, the trial began on January 30, 1992, due to the serious nature of the case. Many security measures were taken in the courtroom, including the installation of bulletproof glass throughout the 2-week trial. Jeffrey sat silently, listening to arguments from both the prosecution and the defense. Jeffrey's defense strategy was simple. They did not try to argue that he was not guilty of murder. Instead, the defense sought to have him hospitalized for treatment. They argued that he needed psychological and psychiatric help, asserting that normal people do not commit such heinous acts. The prosecution, in contrast, argued that, under Wisconsin law, a person who remembers his actions and understands what they have done should be considered sane. A few days later, a verdict was reached. Jeffrey Dahmer was sentenced to 15 consecutive life sentences, plus an additional life sentence for a 1978 murder, bringing the total to 16 life sentences. Jeffrey expressed deep remorse for the pain he had caused the families of his victims and acknowledged their anger toward him. He was then sent to a maximum security prison in Wisconsin. During his time in prison, Jeffrey rediscovered his faith in God. Recalling the times he had gone to church with his grandmother, he asked a local priest to baptize him, and the priest agreed. On July 3, 1994, a fellow inmate, Osvaldo DeRuthi, attacked Jeffrey, who was hospitalized but survived then. In November of that year, another inmate, Christopher Scarver, who was also serving a life sentence, attacked him. Christopher had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Christopher disliked Jeffrey, who described himself as religious, a characterization that Christopher found insincere. In November, Christopher, Jeffrey, and another inmate, Jesse Anderson, who was serving time for murdering his wife, cleaned the inmate gym. They were also required to clean the locker room and restrooms used after gym class. when they were left unsupervised. Christopher seized the opportunity to carry out his dangerous plan to attack both Jeffrey and Jesse. First, he followed Jeffrey into the locker room. Where Jeffrey was cleaning, he took a steel bar from the weight room and struck Jeffrey in the head several times. He then attacked Jesse in the same manner. Afterward, he left the gym and called security. Both Jeffrey and Jesse were taken to the hospital, but Jeffrey died en route. His death was confirmed upon arrival at the hospital. Jesse remained in a coma for 2 days before being taken off life support. In accordance with Jeffrey's wishes, his body was cremated, and his ashes were divided among his parents. When details of Jeffrey's crimes became public, protests erupted, focused on the fact that 2 police officers who handed over a boy named Konarak Synthesomphone to Jeffrey were not prosecuted. The 2 police officers did not check the identity of the boy or Jeffrey and did not search Jeffrey's apartment. After the trial, the 2 police officers involved were suspended from duty. They later appealed the dismissal, and the judge ruled in their favor, and awarding each $55 in compensation after being reinstated. Both officers resumed their careers. Additionally, after the investigation was completed, the building where Jeffrey Dahmer lived was demolished in the hope of helping people forget the horrific events that occurred there. Welcome back. Detectives, let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Jennifer Logsdon. Tommy Smith was a third-year student at a local college. His girlfriend, Jennifer Logsdon, had just finished her first year at the same school before they met. Jennifer had been living in the dorms, but was bored with the constant partying. She wanted a quieter place to study when her longtime friend, Casey Johnson, decided to attend the same college. They saw a great opportunity to rent a house together. They all agreed on a small rental home in Peoria, Illinois, and pooled their money to make it work. Everything seemed fine until a hot summer day. On July 19, 1991, at that time, 20 years old, Tommy and his 19-year-old fiancée, Jennifer, were busy preparing for their wedding. They planned to start a family after finishing their education and securing jobs. They are enjoying the weekend. With Casey, the 3 of them had been living together for a while, getting along well and supporting each other. Tommy and Jennifer even intended to continue living in the house after their wedding. On the evening of July 19, 1991, Tommy, Jennifer, and Casey gathered to watch a movie together. They chose a horror film by Stephen King. They set up a mattress taken from the bedroom, prepared some snacks, and made themselves comfortable. It seemed like a typical evening, and no one could predict the nightmare that was about to unfold. After a while, Jennifer fell asleep, followed by Tommy, while Casey went to a different room to sleep. In the middle of the night, Jennifer woke up to a terrifying scream coming from nearby. Feeling confused and bewildered in the darkness, she noticed Tommy fighting with a stranger. The attacker was a large black man with bloodshot eyes and a knife in his hand. Despite looking very intimidating, Tommy fought fiercely with the attacker, who struck him with many powerful blows. Obviously, this tall man was stronger and more aggressive than Tommy, but Tommy still fought back with all his might. Jennifer felt confused and helpless. She noticed something strange. The attacker had socks on his hands while his feet were bare. She realized that Tommy was losing strength, but she herself was unable to move due to shock and fear. Tommy was attacked in the chest and neck. When Tommy collapsed, Jennifer knew that the attacker was going to continue. He aimed at her and attacked with the knife, desperately. Jennifer fought back with all her strength. At one point, she managed to overpower the attacker and take the knife from him, but she had already sustained serious injuries and could no longer fight. The knife slipped from her hand and fell to the floor. The attacker picked up the knife again and attacked her, quickly knocking her unconscious. At that moment, a conversation could be heard coming from the room where Casey was sleeping. Realizing the danger, Casey called 911 for help. Unfortunately, the connection was poor, or the operator was distracted. As they repeatedly asked for information, the attacker, hearing the commotion, became enraged. He seemed to want to kill her. He broke the lock and rushed into the room, Casey barely had time to finish her sentence and hung up on emergency services because he attacked her. Casey pleaded for her life, begging him not to hurt her. However, the assailant lunged at Casey, striking her in the face and chest. Despite her efforts to defend herself, she was overpowered by the attacker during the struggle. The knife blade became badly bent and eventually broke off from the handle, leaving the assailant without a weapon. By this time, Casey had already suffered several serious injuries, including to her throat. After the incident, the attacker picked up the broken blade and fled the scene. Fortunately, Casey managed to call the police. Officers arrived at the house around 3 a.m. Upon entering, they were met with a horrifying sight: items scattered and equipment damaged, indicating that a violent struggle had taken place. Amidst the chaos, they found Tommy lying unconscious on the floor, with multiple injuries. Despite his injuries, he bravely protected Jennifer and Casey. Fortunately, Jennifer and Casey were still alive and remained conscious for several minutes after the police arrived. Paramedics were on the scene, attempting to save them. Jennifer seemed to be the most distressed. She expressed her fear of death and begged for help for Tommy and Casey. At that time, her boyfriend, Tommy, was unconscious, very pale, and had lost a lot of blood, but he was still breathing. Afterward, both Jennifer and Casey believed that they had survived the attack thanks to Tommy's brave actions. The attacker hit Tommy so hard that his knife bent and he lost much of his strength as a result. He was no longer able to inflict deep wounds, only superficial ones, however. Without immediate medical attention, both Jennifer and Casey would have died from blood loss. Fortunately, help arrived in time, and they were saved. They were taken to the hospital and placed in the intensive care unit. Their lives were very fragile. Tommy, however, was not as fortunate. He sustained the most severe injuries and bled to death. Passing away just after the paramedics arrived, his family was not surprised by his actions. They felt immense pride in him. Tommy was always selfless and loving, a true hero who protected Jennifer and Casey. Jennifer believed he would have made a wonderful husband and father, with a bright future ahead of him. Sadly, she never had the chance to experience that future. Investigators aimed to gather information about the attacker to begin their search. This individual was clearly dangerous and posed a threat to society, potentially targeting more victims at that very moment. Although the attacker was not masked, the darkness made it impossible for Casey and Jennifer to provide a detailed description. They could only say he was a strong black man. However, they did recall an important detail. He had socks on his hands and was barefoot. It appeared he had put on gloves just before the attack to avoid leaving fingerprints. But he did leave footprints, which could help identify him. Given this information, the police concluded that the suspect likely lived nearby, as it would be difficult to walk long distances on asphalt without shoes. This insight helped the officers narrow down their list of potential suspects to those with prior assault convictions. One suspect was ruled out because he was already in custody for another crime. Another young man, known for violent offenses, had a solid alibi. That was confirmed. The police had only one suspect left to investigate: Jennifer's neighbor, Jean Brown, 27 years old, who lived across the street. When the police went to Jean's house to check, they found a blood stain on the mosquito netting of a window. Jean explained that the blood came from a cut he had sustained in the kitchen the night before. However, this explanation was not convincing and made him the prime suspect. He was taken to the police station for questioning. Meanwhile, the forensic scientist was investigating the crime scene for evidence and found several important clues. One clue was an invitation to a party that Jennifer, Tommy, and Casey were planning for the following weekend. It had fallen to the floor during the struggle. They also found human footprints on the ground. These footprints indicated that the attacker was barefoot, which could lead to valuable clues upon comparison. It was determined that the footprint matched Jean Brown's. Additionally, forensic experts discovered tiny drops of blood in his hair. Jean understood that he was facing serious charges that could result in severe penalties. The investigators were pressuring him and encouraging him to confess so that he could receive a lighter sentence. Eventually, Gene began to share his version of events. He claimed that he only intended to confront Tommy, but when Tommy resisted, he lost control. Gene noticed that Jennifer had woken up, and, in a panic, he attacked her as well. Hearing a noise from Casey's room, he thought his only option to avoid arrest was to eliminate everyone in the house. However, he could not explain why he attacked them. The police were actively gathering evidence, confirming that Gene had broken into the house at night with the intention of stealing money and purchasing banned substances, a claim he later made in order not to leave fingerprints. He wore socks on his hands. However, he did not know that footprints were as distinctive as fingerprints. If he had realized this, he might have worn socks on his feet too. His testimony sounds like a detective story, but in reality, it is very unconvincing. Using a knife to try to steal just a few dollars seems absurd. The choice of a house where 3 unemployed students live together may seem strange. What was his plan? How could he buy banned substances without a strategy? These questions didn't align with the overall situation, and it seemed unimaginable that a small robbery could end with 3 people being brutally harmed. In this situation, investigators suspect that Gene's real targets were Casey and Jennifer. He may have wanted to abuse them. Perhaps that was the reason he attacked Tommy first. To eliminate the main threat to his plan, it appears Gene underestimated Tommy's resistance. After dealing with Tommy, he noticed that Jennifer had woken up and that Casey was already calling for emergency help. At that moment, Gene's plan began to fail. In a hurry, he turned his attention to Casey and Jennifer, believing he had already killed Tommy and Jennifer. He quickly tried to attack Casey, grabbed her purse, and fled with a broken knife. The investigation revealed that Tommy was the one who managed to wear out Gene during a prolonged struggle, although he fought bravely. Tommy sustained severe injuries. Casey played a crucial role in the fight. She managed to bend the knife blade and even knocked it out of Gene's hand. After that, the knife became more difficult to wield. Jennifer also suffered injuries, making her one of the most affected individuals alongside Tommy. Jennifer spent a significant amount of time in the intensive care unit, teetering between life and death, in addition to several stab wounds. She had a punctured lung. Fortunately, both she and Casey miraculously survived. Despite doctors' warning that they were extremely close to death, however, they continued to deal with the aftermath of the traumatic experience. One troubling aspect of the investigation was the apparent indifference of the neighbors. They lived in a quiet suburban area, known for its low crime rate, where there is almost no noise at night. Casey, Tommy, and Jennifer cried out for help, but local residents reported that no one heard their screams, not even the nearby neighbors. This silence allowed Gene to leave the scene of the crime and return home without being noticed. If Casey hadn't managed to call for help, she and Jennifer would have bled to death without any chance of survival. Casey was the youngest person present during the attack, only 17 years old. Despite this, she fought back bravely, suffering many injuries in the process. After that, Gene took his crime knife before running away, leaving Casey behind because she pretended to be dead. What ultimately saved her was a call to emergency services. It is hard to imagine the horrors that would have befallen Casey and Jennifer had Casey not successfully called for help. At this point, the 911 dispatcher's response raised many concerns, and the public was outraged by his slow reaction due to a poor connection or lack of experience. He had difficulty responding quickly. He repeatedly asked for clarification, revealing his uncertainty. This delay was significant, and a quicker response might have saved Tommy during the subsequent interrogation. Gene provided more details about that tragic night. He claimed that he had been at home all day and that he was using banned substances, with his last use occurring just before dinner with his family. Then, when he ran out of banned substances, he decided to rob 2 young neighbors, Casey and Jennifer. For some reason, he was unaware that Tommy lived there permanently and that they had no money. It seemed that he had not planned the crime. It was a spur-of-the-moment decision. Gene was looking for an easy way to get money through theft so he could buy more banned substances. Gene had invaded their home with extreme brutality, shocking the community once again. The incident drew attention, particularly because it involved Gene, an African American, and banned substances. It was a senseless attack on young, promising individuals. Detectives suggested that the motives behind this aggression could include financial gain, a need for intimacy, and possibly envy and hatred towards more successful individuals, specifically attractive young women like Casey and Jennifer. It seemed he aimed to destroy something beautiful. The robbery appeared to be a tactic to lessen his culpability and secure a lighter sentence. However, these were empty justifications, given that the victims included the deceased Tommy and two seriously injured girls, Casey and Jennifer. Consequently, Gene faced charges of attempted murder and first-degree murder at the time of his arrest. He was married and had a son. His family was shocked that he chose a life of crime and banned substances instead of a normal life, ultimately severing ties with him nonetheless. They weren't entirely surprised by the incident. This was not his first crime. He had previously committed robberies and engaged with banned substances. However, his earlier criminal behavior had not been as brutally violent due to the overwhelming evidence and Gene's confession. Investigators quickly secured a search warrant for his house. In his room, they found physical evidence. He had not managed to dispose of the items. Forensic experts discovered that these items were soaked in blood. DNA testing confirmed that the blood belonged to Tommy, Casey, and Jennifer. However, by that time, Gene began to retract his statements. He claimed that he was cut by broken glass while taking out the trash in the evening, causing injuries to his arms and legs. To challenge Gene's account, special tests were conducted. It is common for criminals to injure themselves during knife attacks, particularly when the knife strikes a hard surface like a bone. This can cause the hand to slip onto the blade. Gene had cuts that matched the typical injuries seen in such cases. His hands and the knife were covered in blood, and he often displayed aggressive behavior. But at that moment, he was so enraged that he did not feel pain, given that Gene was a suspect from the beginning of the investigation and that sufficient evidence was found against him. Resisting was futile. In addition to the items found in his room, they also discovered a deformed knife blade from a pen that he had taken with him. The strongest evidence against Gene was microscopic blood droplets from Tommy found in his hair. This evidence provided enough reason to file charges. He was arrested just hours after the massacre, leaving him no time to dispose of the evidence. At that time, the crime was punishable by death, a penalty that was abolished in 2011. The defense attorney began to build a case, claiming that Gene was insane, arguing that he was unaware of his actions. They pointed to the fact that he did not attempt to destroy any evidence, as the murder knife was discovered in his home, along with other incriminating documents. Additionally, the attorney noted that Gene did not wash off the blood or change his clothes, which could indicate that he was not in a sober state. They also highlighted the numerous cuts on his hands as further evidence of his mental state. The attorney even considered arguing that Gene had attempted to end his life throughout the process. The defense aimed to portray Gene in a more sympathetic light to lessen his punishment. Gene supported this narrative by claiming that he could not remember parts of the attack and attributing his actions to intoxication and the use of a banned substance. The prosecutor's office stated that this violent attack was carried out with extreme cruelty. Gene's actions showed no signs of emotional distress or insanity. He broke into a house and attacked 3 young people, Tommy, Casey, and Jennifer, who posed no threat to him. His actions were completely unjustified. The prosecutor's office also noted that robbery was a factor in the attack, which is indirectly supported by the small amount of stolen items. Gene could have taken more valuable possessions, but only grabbed Casey's purse, which had little money in it, as he fled. Furthermore, They believe Gene targeted the house primarily because he had malicious intentions toward Casey and Jennifer, with Tommy being the main obstacle, however. Gene's testimony changed several times. Leading up to the trial, he eventually claimed that he did not attack Tommy with a knife. Unexpectedly, he stated that Tommy was the one who grabbed the knife and used it against him. Gene insisted that he overpowered Tommy and took the knife during their struggle. He later fell into a state of emotional distress. Furthermore, Gene denied any intention to rob, claiming he had no idea how he ended up in their house. He attributed his confusion to his unstable mental state during the altercation. A knife handle was discovered at the scene. It seems Gene lost it during the struggle, and since he was fleeing in the dark, he didn't have time to retrieve it, leaving his fingerprints on it. At that moment, Tommy was not involved with the knife. Gene's actions suggested that his intentions were more malicious than he claimed. He didn't wear a mask and appeared unconcerned about being recognized, likely because he didn't expect anyone else to be in the house. If his goal was merely to steal money, there would have been no reason for him to attack them. Gene confronted Tommy while he was asleep, and there was no indication that Tommy had noticed him or attempted to fight him off. During the trial, a statement from one of the detectives sparked controversy. He praised Tommy for his bravery in confronting Gene, which he claimed saved the lives of Casey and Jennifer. However, this account contradicted the widely accepted version of the incident, according to the detective. Tommy had tried to detain Gene, engaged in a struggle, and attempted to hold him down until the police arrived. Yet, there was no evidence to support this claim. Moreover, even if Tommy had tried, it clearly failed, as Gene managed to injure Casey and Jennifer and escape. Eventually, this version of the incident was dismissed. Surprisingly, Tommy's mother chose not to pursue the death penalty for Gene. Despite having lost her only son, she found the idea of Gene's mother grieving over her child's coffin because of her decision unbearable. Although Gene attempted to show remorse, the jury did not believe him. To avoid the death penalty, he struck a deal with the prosecution. He expressed regret for killing Tommy Smith and stated that he would rather end his life than have caused this pain. He mentioned that if he had known that the banned substance would lead to this, he would never have used it. By pleading guilty to murder and attempted double murder, Gene avoided execution. He was sentenced to life in prison for Tommy's murder, along with an additional 30 years for each of the attacks on Casey and Jennifer, and 15 years for burglary. Gene was incarcerated on January 16, 1992, after the verdict. The lawyer submitted several appeals, suggesting there might be a change in the case. However, these claims were quickly dismissed due to the overwhelming evidence against Gene. He is currently serving his sentence at the Illinois Correctional Center. Casey and Jennifer are still recovering from the incident. They will always carry scars from the injuries inflicted by Gene. The emotional trauma was even more severe. Jennifer struggled for a long time to cope with Tommy's death, but eventually, she found a way to move forward, despite Gene's apologies. Casey and Jennifer could never accept them. They believed that the only appropriate punishment for Gene was execution, as he could not make amends for the harm he caused by killing Tommy, Casey, and Jennifer, who miraculously survived this senseless act of violence. Vowed to prevent any attempts by Gene to gain release from prison, given the seriousness of his crimes. It is unlikely that he will ever leave prison. After the incident, his wife distanced herself from him, significantly limiting his contact with their child.
Before the summer of 1988, the Carr family enjoyed a happy life in the small town of Alturas. They were known for their strong faith and attended church every Sunday, embodying a peaceful, trouble-free family. However, their calm life was disrupted on June 14th, when 17-year-old Dwayne found a threatening letter in their mailbox. The anonymous note was alarming, warning the family to leave Florida or face serious consequences. Distressed, Dwayne quickly showed the letter to his parents. His mother, Peggy, was filled with fear, while his father, Pi, dismissed it as a prank. As summer transitioned into fall, the family's anxiety increased, peaking on October 23rd when Peggy suddenly became seriously ill. She suffered from intense nausea and severe pain, and strikingly, her hair began to fall out in large clumps. Despite her worsening condition, Pi insisted on not taking Peggy to the hospital, thinking it was just a temporary illness. However, Peggy's health rapidly deteriorated, and within a week, she fell into a coma. To make matters worse, Dwayne started showing the same troubling symptoms as his mother. This alarming situation led to a police investigation. On December 2nd, authorities made a shocking discovery. The sickness affecting the Carr family was caused by thallium, a deadly chemical often used in rat poison. Tests revealed that every family member, including Pi, had dangerously high levels of this poison in their bodies. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that someone was deliberately targeting the Carr family. The letter they received was not a joke. It was a warning of the danger ahead. Authorities now had to work quickly to identify the person responsible and prevent further harm. Turn back time. In 1988, Dwayne was happily living with his family in the peaceful town of Alturas, Florida. His mother, Peggy, worked hard as a waitress at a local diner. After raising 3 children by herself, she found love with Pi Carr, who had 2 children of his own, creating a blended family. Life in Alturas seemed perfect. It was a quiet place where people left their doors unlocked, ideal for raising a family. However, on October 23rd, everything changed in a tragic way. Early in the morning, Peggy went to work as usual. However, shortly after arriving at the diner, she began experiencing a burning sensation in her legs and feet, followed by severe chest pain. She was quickly taken to the hospital, where her condition left her nearly incapacitated. Despite extensive tests, doctors were unable to determine the cause of her symptoms and sent her home with pain relief medication. A week later, on October 30th, Peggy and Dwayne, along with Dwayne's stepbrother, Travis, were taken to the hospital with severe symptoms. The pain was so intense that they were brought to tears, and they were scared for their lives. Peggy was admitted to the intensive care unit, where an infectious disease specialist noticed something troubling, suggesting possible poisoning. He decided to test for thallium, a toxic substance banned in the U.S. since 1972, but still found in some old rat poisons. The test results were shocking. Peggy had 50 times the deadly amount of thallium in her body. The following day, October 31st, she fell into a coma. Travis needed a respirator, and Dwayne showed no signs of getting better. The police quickly started an investigation with a clear goal: to identify the source of the poisoning and prevent more harm. They searched the orange groves, tested the neighborhood's water supply, and even investigated the diner where Peggy worked, but found no signs of thallium. As news broke, panic spread through the community. Concerned citizens demanded answers, anxious about their safety. Investigators arrived at the Carr home, carefully collecting dust samples and over 400 household items for testing. One item of particular concern was a 6-pack of Coke bottles, 3 of which were unopened. Tests showed that each bottle contained more than a gram of thallium, enough to be lethal to an adult. The lead detective understood that there were 2 possible explanations. Either the Coke had been tampered with at the factory, or it had been contaminated elsewhere. If it was factory tampering, many more people might have consumed the poison, potentially affecting not just the county, but the entire state or even the nation. This fear led locals to hesitate before drinking Coke. The investigation initially targeted the bottling company. However, thanks to Coca-Cola's cooperation, it was quickly determined that large-scale tampering was not possible. It was found that tampering with the product at the plant could not physically happen. As a result, the police concluded that this was a deliberate attack on Peggy Carr and her family. The investigation focused on family members, with Peggy's husband, Pi Carr, becoming a key suspect. Although they had been married for just 7 months, their initial happiness had faded quickly. Pi spent long hours working at the mine, which made Peggy increasingly suspicious of him. One night, she caught him with another woman, further deepening her concerns. During the weekend that Peggy became ill, Pi happened to be out of town. When he returned, he was reluctant to take her to the hospital. As investigators looked further into Pi's past, they tried to find a reason why he would poison his wife. However, one question continued to trouble the police. Why would Pi also poison his own son, Travis? During the interrogation, Pi shared an intriguing piece of information. On June 14th, 4 months before Peggy got sick, Dwayne discovered a letter in the mailbox. Inside, there was a yellow post-it note with a typewritten warning telling the family to leave Florida within 2 weeks or they would face death. At first, Dwayne and his siblings found it funny, but now Pi's lack of concern appeared more suspicious. The police discovered that unsettling events had previously occurred in the Carr household. A few years earlier, 2 of their dogs had died unexpectedly, showing signs of severe illness and hair loss. This raised a disturbing possibility that they might have been subjected to experimentation. As Peggy's condition worsened, Dwayne and Travis showed no signs of getting better. The entire family was tested for thallium. The results were shocking. Every family member, including Pi Carr, had trace amounts of thallium in their system. This finding ruled Pi out as a suspect, since it seemed unlikely that someone would commit such a crime while also risking their own exposure to the poison. Even Peggy's 2-year-old granddaughter, Casey, had traces of thallium. On March 3, 1989, after 5 months of suffering, Peggy's health took a tragic turn for the worse. Dwayne was summoned to her bedside one last time as the family made the painful decision to take her off life support. Peggy Carr passed away at the age of 41, leaving her family in deep sorrow. Peggy's death shifted the investigation to a murder case. Poisoning is an unusual and deliberate method of killing, typically associated with a particularly clever and disturbed individual. When the FBI examined the contaminated Coke bottles, they discovered tiny scratch marks, suggesting that the bottles had been carefully altered. Thallium had been added, the caps resealed, and the bottles looked untouched. Since thallium is both tasteless and odorless, it dissolves easily without leaving typical signs like overflow, discoloration, or sediment in soda. The careful mixture found in the Coke bottles indicates that the perpetrator possessed advanced chemistry knowledge, an exceptionally intelligent person who thought they were more cunning than everyone else. Police began to interview neighbors and townspeople in Alturas, a small community with only a few hundred residents, as they searched for the person responsible for this terrible crime. The closest neighbors to the Carr family were George James Trepal and his wife, Diana. When detectives questioned Trepal, he reacted with surprising anger, criticizing the redneck children and family living nearby. When asked who anyone would want to harm the Carr family, George gave a disturbingly detailed answer. He believed someone wanted them to move away. This was exactly the same message found in a threatening letter sent to the Carrs, a detail known only to the police. This unusual response led investigators to consider Trepal as a prime suspect. Further investigation revealed that George was a self-taught chemist, while his wife, Diana, held a master's degree in chemistry. Both were part of an elite society for individuals with an IQ in the top 2% of the population. Investigators then uncovered George's criminal history. He had previously served time in prison for his role as the chemist in a large methamphetamine operation. One key ingredient used in making methamphetamine is thallium. The news that George was a person of interest surprised even Peggy's son, Dwayne, who found it hard to believe that Trepal was capable of such a terrible crime. The detectives found out that Trepal had a prior altercation with the Carr family over loud music. Just 2 days after this dispute, Peggy Carr was poisoned. Although there were connections between the two events, the police did not have sufficient evidence to arrest Trepal. Typically, police procedures involve questioning a suspect in hopes of securing a confession. However, detectives felt this tactic would not be effective with Trepal, who is introverted and avoids confrontation. Therefore, the FBI suggested an alternative approach. someone needed to go undercover to outwit Treple. The police assigned Special Agent to go undercover in the group that George Treple was part of. The goal was to earn Treple's trust and collect enough evidence to demonstrate his involvement in the poisoning. At first, it appeared that the agent would only need to work undercover for a weekend. However, she was cautioned about Treple's exceptional memory. If he saw her, he might remember her face or car. She, using a fake identity, was getting ready to attend a murder mystery event organized by George Treple and his wife, Diana. She pretended to be a woman about to divorce her abusive husband. On April 14, 1989, she arrived at the local hotel where the gathering was taking place. As she entered, she was met by George himself. Seeing him, she felt anxious that he might recognize her from previous surveillance. She took a deep breath and looked for any indication that he knew her, but Treple didn't seem to remember her. Still, she had to stay alert in her undercover role. She understood that Treple was not likely to confront someone directly. He preferred to poison his victims, leading to a slow and painful death. The agent signed up for the event and received a packet with all the weekend details prepared by Treple himself. The pamphlet outlined several carefully crafted murder scenarios, including one that involved poisoning. One paragraph caught her attention. It stated that when a death threat arrives, cautious individuals should discard all their food and be mindful of what they consume. This alarming similarity reminded she of the death threat the Carr family had received just before Peggy was poisoned, reinforcing her belief that they had identified the right suspect. Throughout the weekend, the agent spoke with Treple, carefully monitoring his every word, aware that any mistake could cost her life. When Treple inquired about her background, she fabricated a story about her husband, a lawyer from Houston, Texas, whom she claimed to have left. Treple revealed that he could detect lies by observing the movement of a person's neck muscles, which made she even more anxious. Before the weekend concluded, she revealed to Treple her plan to move to Florida in order to escape her husband. This confession led to an important development. Treple mentioned that he and his wife were considering relocating their practice and selling their house. After meeting with her supervisors, the agent was told to extend her undercover operation beyond the original weekend. She recognized this as an opportunity to gather important evidence that could lead to a search warrant for Treple's house. Her goal was to find lab equipment or chemicals that would connect Treple to the crime. The next week, she visited Treple's house. During the visit, Treple bragged about how safe Alturas was and how nobody locked their doors. While she spotted several suspicious items, such as a secret passage in the library and a mannequin dressed in bondage gear, none of these were enough to obtain a search warrant. Despite her failed plan, the agent continued to act, committed to collecting more evidence. She understood the dangers involved. Revealing her real identity could put her and her family at risk. Treple, who was very clever, might resort to poisoning her if he found out she was an undercover detective. Over the next few months, she met with Treple for several lunch dates, always being watched closely. She avoided eating or drinking anything after leaving the table. Cautious of Treple's potential to harm her, during these meetings, Treple progressively showed his contempt for those he deemed less intelligent, which provided she with a glimpse into his mindset. After 8 months, the agent had gathered many small pieces of evidence, but it wasn't enough to form a strong case. Her supervisors started to doubt the operation's worth and considered shutting it down. For the agent, giving up was not an option. She felt a deep responsibility to seek justice for Peggy Carr and her family, thinking about how it could have been her own loved ones who ingested the poison. In December 1989, the agent received an important call she had been anticipating. George and Diana Treple had relocated and offered her the opportunity to move into their home. With this offer, the agent gained legal permission to enter the house without needing a warrant, allowing her to invite the county crime scene unit to conduct an investigation. Suspecting that Treple was too intelligent to leave obvious signs of thallium, the investigation team concentrated on searching for residues in areas such as the air conditioning filter and drains. the house still contained many of Treppel's belongings, which provided plenty of chances to collect samples. In the garage, investigators found vials and chemistry bottles, hoping that one of them would test positive for thallium. While waiting for results from the FBI lab, the agent struggling to come up with new ways to engage Treppel. As time passed, she realized that by January 1990, with no updates from the lab, she needed to take matters into her own hands. She aimed to trick Treppel into incriminating himself, not knowing that he was preparing his own deception. The agent scheduled a meeting with Treppel at a picnic area behind a McDonald's, near where he lived. This important meeting was recorded. During their discussion, she gave Treppel a business card that she claimed had been left by detectives looking for him. Treppel reacted noticeably. He became very anxious and visibly unsettled as he tried to stay calm. He repeatedly invited she to visit his new house, but she declined. The atmosphere was tense, leaving one to wonder what would have happened if she had accepted his invitation. After the meeting, Treppel appeared visibly shaken and deeply impacted by the news from her. This marked a critical moment in the investigation. On April 4, 1990, the agent received an unexpected phone call. The FBI had found thallium in one of the vials taken from Treppel's garage. The vial contained thallium nitrate, the same chemical used to poison Peggy Carr and to try to kill her entire family. This discovery provided crucial evidence to bolster the case against Treppel. On April 5th, George Treppel was arrested at his new home in Seguin. Seeing him led into the county jail in an orange jumpsuit marked the conclusion of a lengthy and dangerous investigation. Even when the agent revealed her true identity, Treppel remained calm. The special agent from the county sheriff's office presented him with a warrant for handwriting samples, to which Treppel simply smiled and said, "Oh, okay." She had narrowly escaped becoming Treppel's next victim. In January 1991, George Treppel's trial began with substantial evidence against him. Police found a journal in Treppel's home called General Poisoning Guides, which identified thallium as a common poison used by criminals. The journal included references to harming neighbors, and 55 fingerprints found in it matched Treppel's. The prosecution also presented the tools used to tamper with the Coke bottles, including a set of tiny screwdrivers. One screwdriver was missing and fit perfectly with the marks on the bottle caps, which was incriminating evidence that shocked the jury. Throughout the trial, Treppel maintained a calm and emotionless demeanor, even smiling at times. His lack of remorse and his premeditated actions revealed a disturbing level of malice. He rationalized his cruel actions by claiming he was more intelligent than others and believed that those he deemed less intelligent did not have the right to live. The trial lasted for 2 months, but the jury took only 4 hours to reach a decision. On March 6, 1991, nearly 2 years after Peggy Carr's death, George Treppel was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to death. According to the Florida Department of Corrections, inmates on death row wait an average of 12.7 years for execution. Treppel passed that milestone nearly 8 years ago. With this verdict, justice was served for Peggy Carr. The special agent's unwavering dedication and bravery played a crucial role in bringing this criminal to justice. She put her life at risk to ensure that Treppel was held accountable for his horrific actions. Reflecting on her commitment, one can't help but admire her courage. She went above and beyond to ensure that Peggy's killer faced justice, earning the respect and gratitude of many. The other members of Peggy Carr's family, who also experienced poisoning, fully recovered. However, the loss of Peggy deeply affected her son Dwayne. Losing his mother at just 16 years old was a traumatic event that left him with lasting emotional pain. In the years after her passing, Dwayne struggled with his grief, frequently expressing it through anger and emotional outbursts. Eventually, he discovered comfort in writing letters to his mother, where he shared his feelings. He promised to work on improving his life. Dwayne fulfilled his promise. Today, he is married and is the supportive father his family needs. Each day, he works hard to make his mother proud and honor her memory. Dwayne exemplifies the strength of the human spirit, proving that even after facing great tragedy, it is possible to live a meaningful life.